Welcome to the March 21st, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. I will call the hearing to order at 1 o'clock p.m. Ms. Johnson, can we have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I'll take roll call. Chair Bauke.
Here.
Vice Chair Wardlow. Here. Commissioner Barnwell.
Here.
Commissioner Boss.
Present.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our agenda. The first item is preliminary matters versus requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of any ex-agenda items. Ms. Harganega, do we have any of those?
Chair Bauke, we have none.
Okay. Do we have any announcements or appeals?
No, we have none.
Okay, so that moves us quickly to item C on our agenda, public comments pertaining to items not on today's agenda. Do we have any speakers in person or virtually who have put in a slip or raised their hand?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips. If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on general business, and that's again items not on today's agenda, you can fill out a speaker slip at the back of the room and turn it into staff. I'm not seeing any movement. If you'd like to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised on Zoom, and we also did not receive any general written correspondence, so I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bauke.
Okay, with that, we can close general public comment and move on to our new items on our agenda. The first item on today's agenda is 324 West Montecito Street. The hearing is a request for a conditional use permit and confirmation of the environmental analysis determination that this project is exempt from CEQA under section 15301 existing facilities. Before I start on this item, do any of the commissioners have any ex parte communication they need to disclose at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to the staff presentation, and I will turn it over to Associate Planner Pilar Plummer for the staff presentation. Ms. Plummer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Bauke. As you said, I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara Planning and Zoning Division, and I'll be giving the staff presentation on this project. So the project involves a change in ownership of Santa Cruz Market, which involves a transfer of an ABC license type 20 to the new owner. To the right, you'll see an image of the existing supermarket located close to the intersection of Castillo Street and West Montecito Street that has been in operation at this location since the 1990s. There are no changes proposed to the building or site. The required application that's before the Planning Commission at this hearing is a conditional use permit to allow for the continued off-site sale of alcoholic beverages with a type 20 license. And just to clarify, the type 20 license applies to wine and beer. As some background, the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, ABC, is responsible for regulating all retail alcohol sales within California. Off-sale consumption licenses are issued for businesses that sell alcohol for consumption off the premises, such as liquor stores and grocery stores. And on-site consumption licenses are issued for businesses that sell alcohol for consumption on the premises, such as a bar or restaurant. While ABC maintains authority over licensing, cities can regulate secondary aspects of alcohol beverage sales through its land use powers, such as by using a conditional use permit. The purpose of using something like a conditional use permit is to address related nuisance impacts to the surrounding areas from the sale and consumption of alcohol. While a CUP was previously not required for off-site alcohol sales, the city's current process is to require a conditional use permit for certain licenses, specifically type 20 and type 21 licenses. So just some background. In January of 2017, the City Council of Santa Barbara directed staff to develop regulations for off-sale alcohol establishments. In September of 2021, this was introduced to Council as new regulation ordinances pertaining to alcohol. And then on October 5th of 2021, the City Council adopted ordinances 6027 and 6026, which amended both the Inland Title 30 ordinance and Coastal Title 28 ordinance. This ordinance amendments included a requirement for a conditional use permit for the sale of alcohol for off-site consumption for any new establishments or existing establishments that have a substantial modification. And again, these ordinances only apply to type 20, which is for wine and beer sales, and type 21, which is wine, beer, and distilled spirits. So just to clarify, a substantial modification pertains to the mode and character of an operation. Some examples that are included in the ordinance, but they're not limited to this, is just a change in activity that would happen to an existing operation that basically has them go to a different type of license, or an increase in floor area or shelf space devoted to display and sales of alcoholic beverages, or a change in ownership or transfer of an ABC license, including new owners or licensees. So the latter is what pertains to this specific project, again, because they're doing a change in ownership, so that involves the transfer of the ABC license. The applicant submitted their pre-application review for this project in November of 2023. At that time, staff noted general support as the project site is located in the commercial general zone, which allows for food and beverage sales, and it's also on West Montecito Street, which represents the commercial area of the West Beach neighborhood and includes a mix of uses in the immediate area. Also because, again, the Santa Cruz market has existed on this specific property since the 1990s, and prior to that was occupied by a different supermarket. During that time as well, city staff went out with the police department to do a site visit and noted that the existing operation complies with the performance and development standards, which I'll go through except for one at that time, which is included as a condition of approval as part of this project. So just an aerial view of the site. You'll see it highlighted or outlined in yellow here. This is the intersection of Castillo Street, West Montecito Street, and then it's in very close proximity to Highway 101. In terms of a conditional use permit, the findings for that type of discretionary approval really speak to the desirability of the use, to the public's general welfare, as well as compatibility with the general plan. In addition, for alcohol beverage sales, for off-site sales, the ordinance includes performance and development standards, where the CUP can only be granted if the project is consistent with the standards or if a variation of the standards is approved by the Planning Commission, typically based on an unreasonable hardship. Also, there's additional findings as it pertains to alcohol beverage retail establishments, that the use shall not have a significant adverse effect on the crime rate or nuisance activities related to things like public drunkenness, illegal sale or use of narcotics, or drug and alcohol. So just going through the performance and development standards, first is there's standards pertaining to the containers, sizing, and as well as where they're displayed within within a business. So for example, miniature airline bottles are prohibited and not allowed. Wine is required to be in a container that is 750 milliliters or greater, or multi-pack containers with no more than 6% alcohol by volume. All the wine that's currently sold at Santa Cruz Market complies with this. Beer is required to be in a container greater than 32 ounces. Anything less than 32 ounces shall not be sold unless than one 3-pack. So when we went out to the site in 2023, they were currently selling some single-serve beers, which did not comply with the standard. So I've included a condition of approval that any beer that currently doesn't meet that sizing be removed within a set time period of 30 days. And I believe since I've gone out recently to the site, those weren't there anymore. So they might have proactively removed that specific type of beer. Also, there is display criteria that any alcoholic beverages not be sold within or not be displayed within 5 feet from any entrance or exit, or not at a checkout counter. So this is a floor plan of Santa Cruz Market. This is the entrance to the supermarket. A represents a wine cooler. I'll show you an image of that in a minute. You can see their checkout counters here, fresh produce here. B represents some wine shelving that currently exists. That's directly across from their meat counter, as well as an area for beer towards the back of the supermarket. You can see that they're all a distance greater than 5 feet away from the store entrance. And these are just example photos of the existing supermarket. So again, this is the refrigeration unit. Just going back, that's A here. This chilled beer area is C on the floor plan. And then lastly, we have the wine shelving, which again is right across the way from the meat counter. This is just an example of some of the other goods that are sold within the supermarket, including fresh produce. There are some other development standards that apply to alcohol and beverage sales. So the ordinance contains criteria for new and non-transferred licensees restricting establishments to sites with low to average crime rates and distanced a minimum of 500 feet away from uses such as schools, residentially zoned lots, and social service facilities. However, as the project involves a transferred license and new ownership to an existing business, it's not considered a new establishment. And again, this is a transferred license, so therefore that wouldn't apply. In terms of lighting, noise, and other operational criteria, these are intended to address issues related to potential nuisance impacts related to the off-sale alcohol, related to lighting, noise. The project complies with these standards. For example, they have adequate waste recycling receptacles for customer use. The existing operation doesn't have payphones on the exterior or window obstructions at the entrance, nor does it sell any drug paraphernalia. This is a photo of the existing checkout area. So again, you can see a pretty good view of the market. Again, all the fresh produce to the left. This is the wine cooler towards the back, and then the beer area would be off the photo towards the back of the supermarket. So with this, the police department did review calls for service for the 300 block of West Montecito Street between March of 2020 through February 2024. During that period, the subject lot received called for service predominantly related to transient disturbances or welfare checks. There were only 2 calls during this time period related to in public intoxication, one in 2020 and one in 2024. The police department also issued a local letter of public convenience or necessity, noting that the business operation will provide some kind of benefit to the surrounding community. In terms of upkeep and operating characteristics, again, the supermarket has existed at this location since the 1990s, and prior to that was occupied by a different supermarket. The supermarket is in good standing with the city of Santa Barbara and is compatible with the mix of uses in the area, and again serves the West Beach neighborhood as a neighborhood supermarket. In terms of general plan consistency, so you'll see an aerial view, again the project site outlined in yellow, and the commercial, medium, high density residential general plan land use designation that follows with the CG zoning for this site. There's some different land use element policies that would apply to this. So 1 LG4 encourages a mix of land uses in the commercial area. It's consistent with that, again, because there are a mix of uses, including residential, commercial, and multifamily within the area. Also LG15, sustainable neighborhood planning, which encourages providing opportunities for healthy living and neighborhood serving commercial uses, especially retail food establishments such as small markets and grocery stores. The project is also consistent with the economy and fiscal element, which includes EF2, which manages commercial growth. Again, because there's no change to the site, they're maintaining an existing commercial business. There is no increased growth of commercial floor area with this project. EF4, existing businesses, states that give priority to existing businesses and encourage residents to patronize local businesses by local. So again, this is a neighborhood supermarket, which gives an alternative to other larger chain supermarkets in Santa Barbara. And EF14, local needs, encourage enterprises that serve the needs of local residents, workers, and businesses. In terms of environmental review, the project is exempt per CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act Exemption 15301, existing facilities, which allows for operation, permitting, licensing, or minor alterations of existing private structures involving negligible or no expansion of former use. Again, this is an interior view of the supermarket. And staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission move to approve the conditional use permit subject to the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, as well as confirmation of the environmental analyst determination of exemption for this project. I did have one also comment regarding the conditions of approval, and I can pull those up if you like. Specifically under general conditions, mandatory training. The police department is now allowing either the responsible beverage service, RBS, training or the licensee education on alcohol and drugs program lead training. So I can go to the conditions of approval to show that, but basically we would just be modifying that to include the lead training or RBS training. And that concludes my presentation. The applicant is here as well as the current owners of the supermarket. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Plummer. Next, we'll have the applicant, if you would like to make a presentation as long or as short as you'd like. Yeah, up to 15 minutes. And Ms. Johnson, you can start the clock. Please state your name for the record. And,
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. And my name is J.K. Mondel. I've been in the real estate and development and lending business locally for about 40 years, along with consulting, which is the reason I'm here. I'm here on behalf of Santa Cruz Market, the purchaser of the market, the Singh family, and longtime owner of the Santa Cruz Market, the Maduno family. We're requesting a conditional use permit to allow the continued sale of alcoholic beverages with a Type 20 license for beer and wine at this location. The Madugo family is here with us today. Unfortunately, the buyer, Mr. Singh, couldn't be here. He's attending to some family matters out of state, and he apologized that he couldn't make it. He was looking forward to it. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of you. I've been in this area for a long time, and I've seen so much good come to Santa Barbara over the last 40 years, and much of it has come due to the detail and attention that the planners and the Planning Commission of Santa Barbara have given to this area. It's just been wonderful to see, and everybody involved here pretty much understands the reasoning behind the CUP is to try to maintain the integrity of this beautiful city. So anyways, we'd like to thank the Santa Barbara Police Department for their diligence and support, and to provide Santa Cruz Market with a public convenience and necessity letter. We really appreciate the support. We'd like to thank all the people who wrote in to support the Santa Cruz market and this transfer has been quite amazing and touching to me to read these. If you haven't already, you should really take some time, because the Madunos have done just an amazing job at that market, and pretty much anybody you speak to will let you know that you just can't find produce like that in any store, and the meat department pays so much special attention to their clients. And the Singh family is really loves the store. It took the Madunos a long time to find somebody who they felt would follow in their legacy to provide this wonderful service to the West Beach area as they have. And so it's a very good marriage that we have here. And so we really appreciate this whole situation and the support from the community. We'd also lastly like to thank Pilar Plummer. She's just been amazing. I work in communities throughout the country in development, and I have to say, you know, sometimes we worry about the planners we receive, and she is one of the best planners I've ever worked with. She's been right on top of everything, professional, and we feel like she really, really worked hard for us. And if anybody's listening out there, I'd just like you to know that Pilar, if you ever have her as your planner, that you should feel fortunate, because she is quite amazing. And anyways, regarding the Santa Cruz market, as written in our application and well stated in Pilar's staff letter, the Santa Cruz market is only changing hands, and no changes to the operation or business are proposed. Other than carrying forward the store's great legacy of providing excellent service, produce, and meats for the West Beach community in Santa Barbara. As many of you know, Santa Cruz Market is well-known, award-winning supermarket. They've won so many awards and brought so much pride to Santa Barbara. It's really, if you haven't been to the store, it's really worth going and seeing it, because it's really such a beautiful store. And it's not only been such a great asset for the West Beach community, but pretty much the whole city of Santa Barbara, because, you know, its location to the transportation center and train station, downtown, and the beach and marina. It's a convenient spot for people who are staying in hotels, timeshares, to come and have a one-stop place where they can shop and buy their food and buy beer for their outing to the beach or out to sea. So anyways, I wrote this, I might as well read it. As expressed in letters written by citizens of West Beach community, having a one-stop supermarket that sells both quality foods and beer and wine is essential to the Santa Barbara community. Santa Cruz Market is an awesome one-stop store that has served great benefit for the city of Santa Barbara communities for over 60 years. It has been selling beer and wine since its existence, and the store, as it is a public convenience and a necessity, as the police wrote in their letter. And we are respectfully asking that you approve the conditional use permit for all these mentioned reasons. And thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mondillo. So we have 9 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock for you if you would like to speak to any questions the public has. So do we have any public commenters, either in person or virtually?
Thank you, Chair Balke. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this item, you can fill out a speaker slip and turn it into staff. I'm not seeing any movement, so I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you wish to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but we did receive 19 letters of written correspondence, which were distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Balke.
Okay, thank you. So our next step is the question period. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of staff or the applicant? Commissioner Wiscombe hit the button first, so we'll go with her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get clarification on the 32-ounce containers. Does the 7-Eleven across the street get to sell? I'm gathering from the letter that was sent in that you wanted to accept the conditions, the conditional use permit, except for the 32, except the sale of single-serving beer containers that are less than 32 ounces. So you were asking for that exception, and no, not anymore. Okay, because then I know Ms. Plummer said they were removed, so.
So through the chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, just to correct that, so they're accepting of staff's recommendation to have that condition of approval, removing any single-serving beer that doesn't meet the container sizes.
Okay, so the ordinance, we're not making any changes to
Yeah, they're not
what's-
asking for any variations.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the letter was, that was my understanding. So that's changed since then. Okay. So, and I think that's pretty much my only question. I guess I'm just going to ask Mr. Domus, just because I asked him before the meeting, and I think it's important here. This ordinance was done over 2 meetings by Planning Commission and a lot of work by staff a few years ago. And Mr. Domus, my understanding is this is the first time this has come to us as a conditional use permit. Is that correct?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Wiscombe, correct. This is the first time since the ordinance became effective in 2021 that it has.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the end of my questions.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be sure I'm clear on this. The floor layout that went into some detail, that's the same floor out that we've always had, right?
That's correct.
And the request for the type and size of alcohol and containers, that's the kind we've always had. Thank you.
Any other questions by other commissioners? I've got 2. One, visiting the site, and then this is a operational question. I was wondering why the chilled wine is in its location and not next to the rest of the wine. It's sort of a fragmented situation.
There's a short and quick answer to that, and that is where it's always been. Since we bought the store in 1989, that's where it was. So, the way the store is small and we got everything in its spot, and so to move that would require moving something else and start a whole
Right. Chain
puzzle. Right.
Yes. It'd be a sequencing of things that would happen.
And
as
so
opposed
it's
to one
always
wide.
been there, and I didn't see a reason to move it, so it's
Okay.
been there since.
And the other question I had was with you, or actually probably to you first, which is, do you have or the buyer have any desire to open more of these type of facilities in the community? There's definitely a need for such, and the next question will be to the staff, which is, what restrictions does our zoning have currently on having more of these markets? So, first to you.
Well, I'm obviously not. I'm trying to get out. So.
Okay,
I'm
but
finished.
Do you know if the buyer may have?
I
interest
don't
in
know,
that?
but
Okay.
they're buying a location in Goleta of mine also, so they'll have 2 in the community, and whether they open another one, I don't know. But it's very difficult to open a little market nowadays, and so.
Yeah, I understand, and scaling one that's already here works
Yeah.
better than trying to just start fresh, and that was my
Yeah.
reason for the question. Okay, Pilar?
So, Chair Bauke, neighborhood supermarkets are definitely encouraged in the general plan. As far as, where they can be located, you would have to meet the uses allowed for a particular zone. Again, this is the CG zone, so it allows for food and beverage sales. So any zone that allows for food and beverage sales could have a neighborhood supermarket. There's some other zones that allow for neighborhood supermarkets with a conditional use permit. But again, if you're trying to sell wine and beer, they're going to need to go through this process anyways. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for the answer. So does any other?
Could I make one more comment while I'm standing here? On the ordinance, it says no beers below 32 ounces, but it's okay to sell any beer above 32 ounces. So that's why we had the initial mix-up, because we had 32-ounce beers. Well, they weren't above or below. So the first time I read it, I thought it was 32 and above. But then I reread it and said, no, so we took out the 32s. Everything's out now, but that was just a little note that I thought I would run by you guys.
Okay, thank you for that comment. All right, okay, Commissioner DeLuccio has a comment.
When we get there.
Okay, when you get there. So do we have anyone that would like to make a motion? Or could make a comment first?
I'll make a motion, but I'd like to hear everybody else.
Yep.
But, I mean, I can make the findings for the conditional use permit and the findings for the exemption. So that would be my motion if we're going to make a motion. The chair and myself were the ones who went out and did the site visit. And we found everything in order. You have a really nice store, and I know you got 19 letters. I thought you had 25 letters, but I thought they were, the community really turned out and is very supportive of the location and the services that you provide. And we were thinking just everything's fine, but for practical matters, when you're by the butcher and you have the row of the wines, there are cold cases right next to it, and we say, well, why aren't the wines here in the cold cases and all the way on the other side? Just food for thought, but we're not suggesting that, or I'm not for movement of that. So I would make a motion to move this forward, make the findings.
I'll
for the
second the motion.
conditional use CUP, and also we can make the findings for the exemption.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, this is to Commissioner DeLuccio. With your motion, as I mentioned, we're recommending just one small edit to the conditions of approval. Would your motion include that, to include
Yeah, the
lead
mandatory training to include the lead training, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, that'd be part of my motion. And I have to say one more thing. This is my second year now here, and I'm from West Hollywood, and I was wondering when something like this was going to come before us, because almost at every meeting, we were dealing with these type of permits. So anyway, so I'm not all that, I'm glad it came, but I'm not all that anxious to have a bunch of them come before us, so thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Boss, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take advantage of the time today to thank you for the market. I live on the Mesa, so this is my neighborhood and market, and it's affordable, and it has everything that I need for day-to-day groceries or hosting a great, taco evening, anything. So just thank you for that. And in the staff report, we point out under economy and fiscal health element, when to point out especially EF 14, local needs, encourage enterprises that serve the needs of existing local residents, workers, and businesses. And you have done that in addition to kind of the tourists around the area. So thank you for that. And also under the alcoholic beverage retail establishments, businesses must upkeep and operating characteristics are compatible with and will not adversely affect the livability or appropriate development of abutting properties in surrounding neighborhood. And I'd say you've actually enhanced the neighborhood. It is always clean. There aren't any issues, whether you're parking, biking, walking. So I really feel like it's enhanced my neighborhood. So thank you for the 2 decades that I've been here.
Making me not want to retire.
But thank you, and I'll support the motion as well.
Megan, did you have an item?
Yeah, through the chair, I just want to take this opportunity to also highlight that in the inland zone, we actually downgraded the requirements to do a neighborhood market in residential zones. That was one of the efforts during our previous zoning effort. So you only need a performance standard permit in a residential zone, where previously that was more tedious. So I just want to get that out there because we do really want to encourage neighborhood markets for access to food services. It would, though, as Ms. Plummer stated, if you sold alcohol, require the CUP.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My mother shopped at that store when it was Ayelo's. I've been going to that store since I was a young man, and I support everything that's being said here. I think you're a wonderful service to the community. I'm sorry you're leaving, because I agree with my fellow Commissioner Boss here. I think you've done a great job, and I wish well to the next person, because it's a kind of it's a tender spot in my heart every time I go in there or every time I drive by. So thank you very much. By the way, apparently you have now found out that our staff person, Pilar, is a very good planner, and the secret's out, right?
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Wardlaw.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I just want to echo the comments of my fellow commissioners. I love Santa Cruz Market. All of my friends go there. We have for years. We're obviously sad to see you leave, but we're excited that the store will be staying. And I also really want to commend you on the community engagement efforts that you guys did. I really appreciate hearing from the community, though. As a local resident, I do hear about your market often, and I'm very supportive. So thank you for all the work that you've done, and thank you very much for the kind comments to Ms. Pilar. I think there's a lot of hard work that staff does, and so it was very nice for you to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Okay, with that, well, first off, I support this effort, and as somebody that worked as a community development director in a city that had every single ABC permit go to the planning commission, this is not a new thing for me, and it's an interesting process when you get the PD into sort of a quasi land use thing, but I'm fully supportive, and I'd like to, to the future owner, if he would like to look for more locations, I think the community would be very supportive of such. So with that, we have a motion, I believe. Do I have a second to?
I seconded it,
Okay,
Mr.
you
Chair.
did second. I missed that. Okay, so could we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I'll take roll call vote. Commissioner Boss?
Yes.
Commissioner DeLucia?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yes.
Vice Chair Wardlow?
Yes.
Chair Bauke?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our next item, and thank you much. Okay. And Ms. Pilar, thank you for bringing this to us. All right. Next is a discussion item on our agenda, which is the Single-Family Design Review Board's process improvements. The city staff will be presenting a conceptual level discussion of the proposed single-family design board process improvements, and the discussion will include the proposed code amendment concepts to reduce the number of single-family design board design review triggers and to expand opportunities for administrative staff review and to help cut down on the number of single-family design board projects that require hearings. Before I turn this item over to city staff for their presentation, as I discuss with staff, we're going to use a little bit different approach on this item procedurally. We're going to have staff present a few specific parts, stop for clarifying questions by the commission, then move on to the next section, do the clarifying questions you may have on that section until we're done with each of the sections. And after that, we will then take public comment. After public comment, then we will then combine your comments and questions as one thing, because they're going to be looking for basically commentary, questions, and directions, basically. So with that, I will pass this over to, I believe, Ted Hamilton-Roll is going to make our presentation today. So Mr. Hamilton-Roll, the floor is yours, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bauke, and hello, Commissioners. My name is Ted Hamilton-Roll, Project Planner, and I'm joined by Ellen Kokinda, Design Review Supervisor. We're really happy to be here this afternoon to discuss the Single Family Design Board process improvement effort with you. It's been a lot of work to get to this point, and we are looking forward to getting to this presentation. This is a discussion item, and as such, there will be no appealable action taken today. And to start today's presentation, I'll go over a little bit of S50B's history and background. Then we'll dive into the proposed code amendments with a small break in the middle to answer any clarifying questions the Commission may have. Then after the presentation, we'll open up public comment and move into a structured discussion with specific questions for the Commission's feedback. Prior to 1992, there was no discretionary review of single-unit residential projects except for in El Pueblo Viejo and on historic buildings in HLC's jurisdiction. When the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, or NPO, was adopted in 1992, the ABR's purview expanded to provide a forum for discretionary review of single-unit homes, with a focus on hillside homes because they're more visible to the general public. Eventually, ABR had way too many projects on their plate, and then in 2004, the 3-year process to establish a separate board began. House size and floor-to-lot area ratio, or FAR, dominated that conversation while SFDB was being established. So SFDB was created out of a strong community desire to curtail McMansionization, otherwise known as the trend of building overly large and often incompatible houses to replace the neighborhood's modest homes. Then after the board was established in 2007, zoning code updates over the years, such as the adoption of Title 30, have added work to SFDB's plate, and the board has been loaded on with a lot of projects. This would be the first substantive change to the SFDB program since the board was established. This initiative is in direct response to the Novak Group's 2020 report on the city's land development process improvements. One of Novak's recommendations was to eliminate the SFDB or reassign its duties to streamline and simplify the land development process. We thought the elimination of the SFDB was something the community would not want. Instead, to achieve streamlining goals, we're proposing to amend the municipal code to reduce the number of projects that require SFDB review. Currently, SFDB sees about twice as many applications as HLC and 1.5 times as many applications as ABR. SFDB takes 2 full-time staffers to process all those projects, and we want to make it more manageable for 1 staffer. Note that these numbers just reflect the number of project applications submitted, and each project gets reviewed at a hearing between 1 and 4 times on average. So you can take the numbers you're seeing on screen and multiply those by right about 2 or 3 and get the number of public hearings that's involved here. It makes sense that SFDB reviews so many projects simply because there are far more single-family homes in the city than any other type of building. Single-unit residential zones shown in yellow on the map make up about 57% of the city's land area, excluding the airport. This project will result in code amendments and guideline updates that aim to improve the applicant experience and relieve some of the strain on the board and staff due to SFDB's high project load. Although some significant changes are proposed, we also aim to maintain the intent and purpose of the SFDB, which is to provide a public forum for single-unit projects with potential neighborhood impacts. There are also lots of ancillary parts of this project, including website improvements and board and staff trainings that'll be part of project implementation down the road. In early 2023, staff began engaging stakeholders to seek feedback about the SFDB process. We looked at qualitative as well as quantitative data in order to balance the conversation, not just to hear from homeowners and architects, but also to hear from board members who review the projects on a weekly basis. The most resounding feedback we received can be boiled down to these 3 points. First, the board should focus on the most significant projects, those with a clear potential for neighborhood compatibility or privacy issues, such as new houses, large additions, and significant grading and site work. Second, many participants thought that a lot of projects reviewed at a public hearing could have been reviewed and approved administratively by staff instead. This would help fast-track minor projects through the review process. And lastly, participants felt that the number of SFDB triggers was too high and their scope was unnecessarily far-reaching. To look for opportunities to reduce the number of triggers, we looked back at SFDB applications submitted between July 2019 and June 2022. Within that time period, there were 188 planning applications for full board SFDB review, 206 for consent, and 271 administrative approvals granted in that time period. So between these 2 pieces of the pie, that's 394 projects reviewed at a public hearing for SFDB. To address the high project load, we propose to eliminate design review triggers not essential to SFDB's purpose. Whoops. Did I get ahead of myself? I did, sorry. Most projects are triggered for SFDB review simply because of their geographical location in the Hillside Design District. That's this chunk of the pie here. or because of proposed alterations or additions to upper stories. The remaining projects, about 25%, are triggered by alterations-only trigger categories, such as upper story decks, new roofs, fences, new windows, etc. So yeah, to address this high project load, we propose to eliminate design review triggers not essential to SFDB's purpose. And Exhibit B of the staff report lists all of the proposed changes to the triggers. So if there's something in there not covered in this presentation that you'd like to go over, please do so during the discussion later. To start our conversation about design review triggers, let's first take a look at how they work. First, staff looks at Chapter 22.69 of the Municipal Code and verifies if any of the code sections in that chapter apply to the project they're looking at the planning counter. If one of those sections does apply and SFDB is triggered, then staff determines the level of review that's appropriate. So it's full board consent or administrative based on the project scope and guidance in the SFDB guidelines. If SFDB is not triggered, the applicant can go ahead and submit their building permit application. So on to the proposed trigger concepts. At present, any size addition or alteration on a second or higher story requires SFDB review. The proposed code amendments would exempt minor alterations and small additions to existing upper stories. Larger projects like new second stories on existing one-story houses and major alterations to existing homes would still require design review. You might be wondering what a major alteration is. This is our working definition. It's as follows. Any physical modification to a structure or site that involves a major portion of the structure or has a substantial visual impact on the structure or its surroundings as determined by the community development director. We recognize this definition has some wiggle room. It's subjective in nature, so we'll be seeking the Commission's input on whether we should make this more objective or if we should keep it about like it is. Some examples that we can think of major alterations and that we received feedback on from our focus groups include changes to building massing, cladding the exterior walls in a new material, extensive replacement of windows and doors, and especially enlargement of windows and doors, and new modified or disparate architectural elements that result in a different style. An example is seen in the image on the right, where between the two houses you have a very similar footprint, but the architectural style is changed completely. So these are our proposed triggers for multi-story buildings. Number one, construction of a new multi-story main or accessory building is not changing from current code. Neither is number two, the construction of a new second or higher story on an existing main or accessory building. Number three is a change. It essentially exempts additions smaller than 250 square feet to an existing second or higher story from design review. And number four introduces major alterations as an explicit design review trigger. Technically, it's already a trigger in that any alterations to an upper story trigger SFDB review. We are just now calling it out as an explicit trigger and exempting minor alterations from SFDB review. And again, these are just concepts at this point. These are not official yet, as you know. At last week's SFDB discussion, we discussed the same concepts, and the SFDB had concerns about the 250 square foot threshold in number three. They thought that even an addition of 50 square feet on an upper story could have negative aesthetic impacts depending on where it's placed on the house. And there seemed to be agreement that there should be oversight on even small additions around that size, but that more small additions could be administratively approved by staff than the current practice. We will get a chance for some clarifying questions in a few moments here, but moving right along to Hillside Design District concepts. As previously noted, about half of all SFDB's projects are triggered under the Hillside Design District and Slope Lots category. Hillside Design District is this purple area shown in the city map. Under current code, those triggers are any building and site alterations and any size of addition on lots over 20% slope in the Hillside Design District. Most lots in this district are over 20% slope. When we looked back at the data, we found that most of the projects that were triggered under this category turned out to be fairly minor. Staff considers these minor projects to be the largest opportunity for cutting down on SFDB triggers. Our proposed triggers are as follows. 1, construction of a new main building. This is currently triggered under current code. 2, construction of a new accessory building greater than 250 square feet. This is a change from current code. Currently, it's any size accessory building that requires a building permit at least, triggers SFDB review, so we want to exempt certain small accessory buildings. For 3, we're proposing to exempt additions smaller than 250 square feet to an existing building from design review. And 4, again, introducing the major alterations concept. And again, SFDB had a similar take on the 250 square foot threshold for the Hillside Design District. Depending on where the addition is placed, this could allow for some small additions to slip through without design review and potentially have negative aesthetic impacts. In contrast to the Hillside Design District, the Mission Area Design District, which is shown in green on the map, triggered only 8 projects for review between 2019 and 2022. And the Lower Riviera Special Design District, shown in red, triggered 0 projects. Years ago, the Mission Area Design District was established to protect the aesthetics of the Mission area. The Mission is this landmark identified here. And the Lower Riviera Special Design District was established to protect the multitude of craftsman bungalows that exist in that area. They're hard to see on this map, but it's these green buildings here. These 2 districts can be viewed as placeholders created to protect historically sensitive neighborhoods while historic structure survey work was being done. Now that the survey work is complete, the historic structures in these districts are in the historic resources inventory and not under SFDB purview. They go to HLC. The city's architectural historian, Nicole Hernandez, supports these concepts given that the needed survey work has been completed. So to reduce confusion around these placeholder design districts, we propose to remove them as SFDB triggers and replace them with project scope specific triggers like we just talked about. Again, larger projects like a new second story, significant grading and site work, and major alterations in the Hillside Design District or to a 2-story house would still trigger SFDB review. The last design review trigger we'd like your input on today, and near the top of the most frequently used design review triggers actually, is upper story decks. Decks can have privacy impacts if they're not cited in consideration of neighbors, and to reduce the number of minor deck projects reviewed at SFDB, a design review exception is proposed for decks that are 15 feet from an interior lot line and under 200 square feet. This is consistent with the SFDB guidelines and received strong support in our focus groups. At SFDB's hearing last week, SFDB thought that 200 square feet was a little bit too large, but supported an exception for a smaller upper story deck, maybe up to 120 square feet. So we're curious about your thoughts on that as well. And Chair Bauke will get into the main discussion after the presentation, but since we've covered a lot of information so far, I'd like to just take this opportunity to pause and answer any clarifying questions.
Okay, thank you. Do any of my commissioners have any questions on, oh, we have a couple, okay. Commissioner DeLucio, you are first.
Yeah, mine are kind of basic. I have a lot of comments later. I noticed when you did the Novak study, I was wondering about that when I first came on the commission. But I noticed when you did the focus groups and interviews, there were no residents that were part of the focus group. Can you maybe explain that to me?
Yes, thank you. Ellen Kokenda, Design Review Supervisor. Through your Chair Bauke to Commissioner DeLucio. So yes, that's very obvious that we did not reach out to residents specifically. We had a considerable amount of data from our project applicants, people who had submitted. So we had direct email contact that we could reach out and do survey to homeowners and to applicants, architects, designers, people who were on the applicant team. And then we really wanted, again, to balance the conversation because we know that homeowners and applicants might have one thing. I mean, they want a permit immediately. They don't want to have to go through any kind of design review. Technically, they just want what they want, which is understandable. But we needed to balance that and hear from our board members. And so that was the focus groups of past and present board members. And then not only was the survey developed in partnership with the AIA, but our working group was part of a single-family design board subcommittee, as well as working group members from the AIA advocacy group subcommittee. So it was, again, trying to work with people who really understand the process. And I would say, yes, we didn't reach out directly to residents. I mean, you could reach out to everybody, but it's so specific when a project comes in that neighbors will come out based on what's being proposed. And so it's really hard to kind of target specific people. But we have, on a weekly basis, we understand the participation and we observe participation. We understand how, I think the areas that we discussed of where we could improve is how to help members of the public better understand and better participate in a process like ours because it's so confusing and we have all the different types of reviews and levels of reviews and land use decisions. And so in many cases, we might have someone who comes in who's never been to a public hearing before, and then they show up at the single-family design board. And I constantly say that the single-family design board is probably one of the hardest boards to serve on as a member because you're working with people, you're not obligated to have a licensed architect to be able to represent your plans. You have homeowners dealing with things. You have neighbors coming out. So again, we see the challenges of engaging and trying to have meaningful participation and understanding the process. So I think, again, with just our expertise as planners and what we observe, we understand that there's better communication tools, there's better ways for access with these things. So yes, they're technically not represented in the survey, but I just don't want to, I think we've very much, throughout this process, we want to be sure that we're maintaining a public forum for the issues that mean the most to people. So again, I just highlight that it's been very much present on our minds despite not actively reaching out to those specific groups. And I will say we engaged, a lot of people are residents here as well, so they kind of think about things in multiple ways and with different hats on.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that. The major, when we talk about the multi-story buildings, the trigger may be 250 or more square feet. If it's going to be done administratively, what will be the guidance to make the decisions on the 250 feet? Is it the design guidelines?
Yeah. Chair Bauke, through you to Commissioner DeLuccio, yes, the design guidelines would be the primary tool that staff uses to review second-story additions. And currently not too many changes are proposed to those guidelines. So we would, we'd be looking to you for any kind of feedback on if there's anything specific you'd like to see in terms of criteria for administrative approvals.
And if I might just add on to that, Commissioner DeLuccio, right now you're not seeing the full package of concepts because the guidelines are a completely separate thing. Right now we're kind of dealing with code amendment concepts. And so the guidelines are kind of this other set of things that, again, come later, that will be part of the larger package of things. But right now we're just trying to get kind of the course of how close are we in which direction to move, and then that will help us establish where we might start and kind of what we're legally able to do through guidelines, through administrative approvals.
I have another question. Accessory buildings, what do you define as accessory buildings? Because in Hillside Design District, you're talking about the accessory buildings less than 250 square feet. Yeah, so what do you define as those buildings? Because I know the ADUs, the board has no preview, no say over the ADUs, correct? They're permitted without a review?
Commissioner DeLuccio, so ADUs aren't really part of our proposal. They're kind of a separate animal as
Yeah.
far as the code is concerned. The board does have purview over the aesthetics of accessory dwelling units if they don't meet the ministerial design criteria in the ADU ordinance. So they will occasionally review ADUs. Accessory buildings are defined in the municipal code in both Title 28 and 30, and generally they're detached. There is a limit as far as the square footage you can have, depending on your lot size for an accessory building. Yeah.
You can think of garages are an accessory building, sheds, some kind of cabana, a studio that's not considered a unit. I mean, there's a whole host of things that fall under accessory building that, as Mr. Hamilton Roll mentioned, is defined in our code.
I have one more question I'm going to throw out. I don't know where this fits into all this, but I know that the goal here is to streamline things, right? And make it more administrative, would take over some of the responsibilities. Does the city pride itself correctly so much on the architect, which I like about this city, but do we have an urban designer? Does the city have a full-time architect or urban designers?
Commissioner DeLuccio, so actually, we do not have, when my position, the design review supervisor, opened, I think the city was looking to hire an architect at the time and was unsuccessful in that recruitment. And then they got me instead. And so I am not necessarily I am not a licensed architect. But I think that there is an intention of trying to find someone who, again, is design orient, has architecture background and history, and how that could really be a benefit in some ways. But interestingly, our Public Works Department hired a city architect, and that position is really something separate from the Planning Division, but certainly we've actually consulted with him. This is Craig Schallenberger, who's the new city architect, again, mostly working on capital projects for city projects, but again, has also been a resource of, and has been on the other side of the table as an applicant to kind of understand what our process is.
Okay, thank you. We're glad to have you, by the way.
Thank you. You're stuck.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Just want to remind everybody to keep focus on just the design trigger conversation, because we could easily go down a lot of different rabbit holes. I'm holding a bunch of my comments to later for that reason. So Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Chair. One question, so there was an acknowledgement that minor projects that are exempt from design review can add up over time. So just thinking about how to mitigate or prevent that. So I understand they would still go through staff or administrative review, but can you talk a little bit about just avoiding them adding up to being major, or if that should be included if that should be a trigger included in the major piece?
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. The intent of that statement in the staff report was to note that individual projects over time in a neighborhood can add up and, potentially create some somewhat incompatible looking projects just in that neighborhood. There is currently a design review trigger that tries to prevent piecemealing on any individual project. So if you're doing a window replacement and a re-roof and a exterior cladding, multiple changes over time, the intent is to try to capture all that under one sort of approval and steer folks toward getting one umbrella approval instead of multiple smaller approvals. I think the way that we approach these design review triggers will definitely play into how minor projects could add up in neighborhoods over time. So we're trying to get those thresholds right and prevent anything major from getting by. And really the purpose of SFDB is to, counter huge development and kind of catch the crazy things that come in. We want a reasonable amount of oversight, but not, we don't want to get too into the nitty-gritty with it.
And if I could add, Commissioner Boss, that this really, I do want to acknowledge, we are suggesting to take away minor alterations, which is very different, but we just acknowledge that there's been a tremendous amount of aesthetic oversight on single-family homes. So any alteration that you do to your home, if you're in the Hillside Design District and you have 20% slope, that triggers design review. And of course, yes, we then gauge, can staff approve this? Does it need to go to a public hearing on consent or full board? So there's still, different levels, but I think it's to let go of those minor projects and then really capture what are the major alterations that we think might have the biggest privacy issues or have maybe the biggest impact to a neighborhood or some kind of community concern or neighborhood concern. So it's trying to get that balance right, as Mr. Hamilton-Roll was saying. But I do want to acknowledge that we're proposing to let go of minor alterations on the whole. But yes, if someone's changing their home here and there to where it, eventually makes up a major alteration or some kind of major change, then we're trying to have a backstop to that so we can avoid that process.
Thank you both for the clarifications and the context.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm made uneasy by the very general major and minor without definition. And I know it was mentioned it was an issue for the Design Review Board when they reviewed the proposed changes. I note that member of the Design Review Board is in the audience, Leslie Colas, and I wonder what you would have to say about that. What are your concerns about so general a requirement?
I sent in a letter to each of you this morning. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning, and I was vibrating over this. So I blasted out a letter. My concern with the verbiage that I'm seeing as we currently define a major project, and maybe, Ted, you could bring it up, but it's kind of ambiguous language, and then at the end it says, at the discretion of the community development director. And which is, it creates an environment where we don't have objectivity, we don't have criteria. I think when we have ambiguity like that, it creates fodder for favoritism potentially. Not that I would like to suggest that that occurs in any of our institutions, but it creates opportunity for it. So wherever we can avoid that, I think is obviously desirable. So I think there's got to be a way of quantifying this, and I think that staff is creeping up on that. And when we start talking about some of these thresholds of 250 square feet, well, maybe 250 square feet is okay, but does it have to do X, Y, and Z also, or can it not do A, B, and C? And so I think there needs to be qualifications and quantifications around that rather than a soft as determined by one individual who may be more or less adept at making these decisions based on their professional experience or their education, as Commissioner DeLuccio has alluded to. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Commissioner Wiscombe, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, I'm following up on Commissioner Lodge. And I appreciate, Ms. Colossi, your take on it, because I think it does need some work and clarification for more objectivity. But and my question was simply, it's major alterations, substantial visual impact. Is it a new roof? Is that a substantial visual impact? Or I'm asking the question.
Commissioner Wiscombe, that's a good question, and I think it depends a lot on the site. You have some houses that are a lot more visible to the general public from you know, like on the Riviera, you can see a roof up there a lot better than you can maybe up in a canyon. So it is pretty site-specific, and this is why we've been struggling a little bit with this definition and kind of how to make it a little bit more objective.
Well, maybe.
And if I may
excuse
jump
me.
in here, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Just a minute. I'd just like to say something to Mr. Hamilton Roll about that. Just following up on that point, perhaps it could be that you do include things like new roofs, but then you put a condition in there that there may be exceptions to that, so that people understand that they may have to go through some sort of design review for a new roof or new windows or whatever they're doing, but that there may be exceptions that are not impactful to other neighbors. Yes, Ms. McKee.
And Commissioner Wiscombe, I just wanted to share that anytime someone, a roof material change might be considered a minor alteration. However, when you change the roof entirely and the pitch of it and
I'm not
what
talking
you're.
about the pitch.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to make sure that that is something that we would
That
consider
is
a major
impactful.
alteration,
Yes,
because
yes.
that is dramatically altering an architectural style.
Yes, exactly, and it can be impactful to neighbors, yes. No, I'm really talking about more about materials and things like that. So, that's just a suggestion based on my question, that you know, we have a list maybe of things that might trigger design review, and then have a statement that says there's an exception, because then that just helps the public understand that, I think. And then I wanted to just ask you, Mr. Hamilton Roll, you talked about the things that are in our report that Single Family Design Board review had maybe a little bit concerned about, like the second-story balcony. They said 120 square feet, and in our document, it's 200 square feet. Can you tell me what the other ones were that were like that? You understand my question? That there were one or two others that were
Yes, yeah.
were a little bit more refined or something.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. So one of the concepts was, I guess I'll just go through in order. So the SFDB had some comments about this specific square footage threshold, 250 square feet for additions to an existing second or higher story. So this is assuming that you have a second story already, and you're making an addition, say a bathroom or expanding a master suite, something like that. That can go up to 250 square feet without design review under these proposed concepts.
And then what was their comment on that was perhaps it should be less?
Perhaps it should be less, or even an addition of 50 square feet or even less could have a negative aesthetic impact based on where it's located in the house. Like if it's right on the front, you know, it might not be done in a way that's compatible with the neighborhood. So one of their pieces of feedback was that we remove the square footage threshold and just increase staff's ability to administratively approve additions to existing second stories.
And Commissioner Wiscombe, one example that the SFDB brought up was, let's say you have a 50-foot square foot addition, but you've got, again, I'm giving you an extreme example, you've got a mission-style residence, you know, and then you're proposing some kind of really super, you know, metal addition with totally different materials that doesn't necessarily speak to the existing architecture. So that was kind of the extreme example of how you can imagine, well, it's hard to say to just allow 250 square feet when a smaller square footage could have an impact.
Okay, so their recommendation, or whatever you want to call it, was, or their concern was the actual trigger of 250 square feet. So it's more look at the look at the addition on its own, whether it's 50 square feet or 250 square feet, and see if it might impact neighbors, yeah. Or,
And what's publicly visible or
Right.
what's visible to a neighbor.
Exactly.
Just all
Okay.
those things were also mentioned.
okay, and then is there one more, or two more, one more?
I believe
I
so.
have the 120 square feet balcony, I think, but
For the Hillside Design District triggers,
okay.
generally the same concerns about the square footage threshold. And again, this is an addition of more than 250 square feet. Here it's to an existing main or accessory building, regardless of whether it's on the first or second or third story.
Okay.
And they felt that this could lead to additions that were incompatible with the neighborhood getting through without any kind of aesthetic oversight.
So again, eliminate the reference to a certain square footage. Is that right?
Correct. I
Yeah.
think that was the general consensus at SFDB.
Okay. Okay, and then if there is a, if we do follow that, then what, how does this get decided, whether it's impactful or not? What's the next step to, I'm doing a 50 square foot addition to a mission-style revival home and I'm putting on a structure that's totally modern, that's 50 square feet. Where does it go from there?
Commissioner Wiscombe, is this assuming we're under new code amendments?
Yes.
Okay.
We're assuming that we're moving forward with this whole process, yes. So would it go
Yeah.
to admin or?
It could potentially go to admin. So the way every project starts out at the city is we receive an application through our online permit portal, ACA, Excel Citizen Access, and planning counter staff review the application. So counter staff are looking at the code, they're looking at design guidelines, they're checking in with other staff members to see, hey, what's the best route for this project? What are the entitlements required? So it will, it could potentially be, for a project like you're referencing, it could potentially be an admin approval if it clearly meets the administrative approval standards and is consistent with the SFDB guidelines. If staff doesn't think it is or is uncomfortable making that call, then we'd refer it to consent or full board.
Okay, thank you. I think those are my questions. Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll use this kind of catchphrase, the below the threshold findings are made in the manner that you just described. They're kind of a general staff look at things and it's below the threshold. And so it doesn't have, is that correct?
That's correct. And these are, well, we're looking at code sections and determining if a project is, if something in that code section applies to the project, right? So if the project is located in the Hillside Design District and is on a lot with 20% or more slope, then any exterior alteration is triggered for SFDB review. We have specific guidelines that talk about what projects go to administrative review, consent, and full board. So there is some guidance there. It is up to staff, though, to make that determination.
So I guess you can tell that we're all feeling it's a little kind of mushy right in that area, right? I have another question about the decision-making process. It frequently says the community development director's decision. Does the community development director typically have a senior staff or 2 or 3 senior people that he consults with about these things on?
So, Commissioner Barnwell, just to clarify, so this is a really standard practice, so I think it kind of stands out as something new, but this is a practice that we do every single day. We've done hundreds of them over the years, and the community development director or his or her designee, which is staff, will do administrative approvals on a daily basis. So every time we do an administrative approval for the single family design board or the Historic Landmarks Commission or Architectural Board of Review. That's essentially the community development director's decision. And this is all based on our single family, what we have in front of us is we have a yellow book. It's our single family design board guidelines. So it's quite a familiar process to us. And on the whole, again, staff tend to be more conservative because we know how much aesthetic oversight there is in the city of Santa Barbara and how much this means to people. And I think we're also highly conscious of privacy issues and understand kind of the board members and their concerns when members of the public come out. So we have established criteria of what staff are allowed to approve. And yes, we're not all necessarily architects, but we have working group meetings every single week to kind of verify. And if it doesn't meet these standards, then we send it on to a public hearing. So this is, again, something that's part of very familiar practice to us. And what we're trying to propose here and some of these things is what can we exempt so that it doesn't even trigger SFDB design review at all, and where is that comfort line of like, nope, this is where we need to start, and how do we get that definition kind of wrapped up so that it's clear to staff, it's clear to members of the public, it's clear to homeowners, so they can kind of design their projects so that they have a sense of what process might be applied.
Thank you. Well, I asked the question because we had a meeting here a couple weeks ago where the EIR was not required and the negative deck was not required. The staff had come to a decision which was called the Community Development Director's decision to use a component of the CEQA law which did not provide us with the data that this planning commission wanted in terms of remediation, if you dug up the ground and you found things. And yet that stuff was available to the staff, but it didn't appear in the report that we got because the community development director, and that's why I'm asking, what is the community development director, decided to go this other route. And it was in my opinion, it was a gaping hole in the transparency of what had gone on in staff versus what we were presenting to the world. And we had environmentally sensitive people here who were saying, well, what did you do? How come we didn't follow the standard path? And a decision was made at a staff level to not do that. So that's why I'm asking this now, because I am 100% behind the idea of eliminating some of these design review conversations when staff can do them. But I do have concern. You just expressed it about how these things are designed. And that was why I asked about what is the definition of a community development director's decision. Another question, both of you have used the phrase in talking about a building and whether or not it triggers design review. You've used the phrase the front and the publicly visible. My own personal experience is those get used extensively, but I don't see them in any of your verbiage. Is there a reason why we have not, since we're having trouble with definitions anyway, I know that these design boards and this planning commission in times past have made decisions based on what can you see from the street. How does it affect the streetscape? And if it doesn't affect the streetscape, you get a wider, application of things.
So Commissioner Barnwell, we actually, publicly visible is defined in the SFDB design guidelines. So that's something that we use on a daily basis, again, for looking at administrative approvals, what staff is allowed to be able to look at. But again, there's often just because it might not be publicly visible from the public right-of-way doesn't mean that there's not going to be an impact. So sometimes when you get into specific criteria, let's say someone's changing their windows in the hillside. Well, first we're going to look at what can we approve, what are the materials that they're proposing, what are the administrative criteria that we have to verify and make sure checking off all the list. And then at that point, if it meets everything, we're not just, we're looking at publicly visible. Again, is this going to be changing the architecture or changing the facade completely, making it a very different style? Are you going to have neighbor impacts or privacy impacts through that if there's something that's really, overlooking your neighbor in some capacity? So publicly visible is written in the SFDB guidelines. It's used as a criteria to kind of understand what type of impacts might happen. And so that's just, it's something that is considered at the staff level, and then it's also something that's considered at the board, whether it's consent or full board. And if I may just go back to the community development director, I just want to point out that the community development director language is threaded throughout our Title 28 and Title 30 zoning code. And it's often trying to establish a review authority. So the Planning Commission is a review authority. The community development director, or his or her designee, appoints this, or is the staff hearing officer. The community development director is responsible for all design review administrative approvals, whether it's Single Family Design Board, HLC, Historic Landmarks Commission, Architectural Board of Review. We use the community development director. Other times, we do it for the Mission Creek development setback, that the community development director is kind of ultimately the decision maker. So this is, again, I just want to establish that this is a very routine way of including this in the municipal code as a way to establish review authority. So that, again, the way that it works from a design review standpoint is that we get hundreds of applications in on an annual basis for design review. And if it meets administrative criteria, it means that you've triggered design review. But at that point, we're figuring out how far does this need to go, and can we do this to streamline it? Do we feel comfortable? Does it meet all the criteria? And if not, again, that's when it goes the public hearing route.
I believe the city attorney has a comment.
Sorry, and not to interrupt, Ellen, just Chair Balke, just to go to your point and sure we're on track. This is, I know, a robust discussion item on terms of this process, and I think it's important for everyone to talk about the process and all the steps. Just one word of caution so we're on track. Let's not use previous cases or examples brought before the commission. And then also to the point about the community development director, it is, to Ellen's point, it is a clear, defined position in the city, and it is a clear, defined person that holds it. Again, that person can choose to decide or can delegate that authority. There's many, not only just through the zoning codes, there's other codes involving public safety or anything where there's situations where, like the police chief or his or her designee, right, on dance permits or other issues or tow permits. It's not only a common procedure in the towing code, it's like Helen said, it's a level review of authority. So just wanted to provide that clarity.
Thank you. Commissioner Barnwell, continue.
Well, thank you for that. I'm addressing that topic because it's in this work that we have in front of us, and you're asking us to comment upon these changes. And that word, community development director, is used repeatedly. And I have had experiences with it from this dais. So I am curious as to how it's being used in the expressions of this particular code as compared to how it was done before. And I'm not backing away from that. That review process, whatever that is, as we all know, needs to be as public as as thorough as it possibly can be. I am glad to hear that the public view / front of the building concept has not been removed from the Single Family Design Board language and verbiage, because that ends up being a major factor in whether or not a design review is necessary. And then I'd like to close by just saying I was dazzled by all the work that went into this. When I read, you took 440 cases, I guess it was your number, and you reviewed them qualitatively and quantitatively, and then you interviewed the boards. I want to thank you for that thorough review. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
And Chair Bauke, may I just make one other comment
Sure.
To Commissioner Barnwell? I just want to re-emphasize the fact that, once you establish a design review trigger, then there's still flexibility and level of review. So it still gives you oversight, and we had unanimous support from the single-family design board member, past and present members, as well as our AIA community and homeowners and applicants, who all felt that, you can still have oversight, but how can we expand staff approvals or those administrative approvals? So that, again, that kind of has led us to where are we comfortable establishing that bar, and that's part of the discussion today.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to move on to your next section?
Thank you, Chair Bauke.
Thank you.
We only have a few more concepts to go over.
And the rest of them are much shorter, I promise you. That's the hardest one.
Okay, on to mailed noticing. So similarly to design review triggers, the municipal code specifies what types of projects require a mailed notice, and we'll get to that shortly. For now, the important thing to remember is that not all SFDB projects require a mailed notice. When a project scope does trigger a mailed notice, per code, the city mails a postcard like the one shown on the right here to all the properties within a 300-foot radius of the project site. When a mailed notice is required, that means the project is automatically ineligible for administrative review and must be reviewed at a public hearing. Therefore, we propose to maintain the mailed notice requirement for larger projects like new second stories, new houses, and remove it for more minor projects, allowing for those minor projects to be considered for administrative approval. With that, I'll go through the current and proposed mailed noticing thresholds. So on the top, these top three, a new main building, a 500 square foot addition to a building or lot, or a new second or higher story on an existing building, all currently require a notice, and we're not proposing to change that. The middle two are changes. First, we're proposing to increase the noticing threshold from 150 square feet to 250 square feet for an addition to an existing second or higher story. This would be in line with our proposed design review trigger for additions to existing second or higher stories. We're also proposing to increase the noticing threshold from the current 250 cubic yards of grading to 500 cubic yards of grading outside the main building footprint. And finally, we're proposing to eliminate the noticing requirement for these three items at the bottom. First, minor zoning exceptions. Second, exterior lighting with glare potential. Third, uncovered parking spaces exception. And just to clarify these points, we'll get into minor zoning exceptions shortly, but we are proposing a route that would allow the community development director to review certain minor zoning exceptions for smaller proposals with the ability to refer larger proposals to the SFDB. Removing the mailed noticing requirement for this would allow staff to grant administrative approvals to more of these minor projects like overheight fences and hedges. For exterior lighting with glare potential, outdoor lighting is already addressed in the municipal code under Chapter 22. And there is an enforcement process for projects that are out of compliance with that. Light trespass is also prohibited in single-unit zones. So we thought that since the code already regulates this, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to keep it as a mailed noticing trigger on its own. When we would see exterior lighting with glare potential, it would be usually for one of these top three items anyway: a new house, a big addition, new second or higher story. So that's the reasoning for that. And then for the uncovered parking spaces exception, typically this is just screening for some uncovered parking spaces for cars. So usually it doesn't rise to what we think is the level of needing a mailed notice, and removing the noticing requirement would allow for more administrative approvals of minor projects. At the SFDB hearing last week, we heard that 500 cubic yards might be a little bit too high for a mailed noticing threshold. The board wanted to see it closer to the current trigger threshold here. And there was general support for the remaining concepts, with the exception of, for minor zoning exceptions, there was concern about overheight fences and hedges or elements that could potentially lead to public views being impacted, the board wanted to see a mail notice for that. And we would still have the ability to refer those, and the discretion to refer those to the board and do a mail notice if staff thought it reasonable. On to the required findings. To help support board members and make project review more straightforward, we are proposing some changes to the required findings to approve project. The findings are critical, particularly if a project gets appealed, for decision makers to understand the board's reasoning for their approval or denial of a project. We heard from board members that some of the project findings are often difficult to apply because of their wording and because some of the subject matter is outside of the board's expertise. Therefore, we wanted to trim them down and still retain the meaning of the findings. So there are 5 different sets of findings that apply to various types of SFDB projects, and we're proposing changes to 3 of those sets. The findings that are always used, that are required for every project, are the neighborhood preservation findings. Normally, they take up 3 PowerPoint slides, and the board was excited to see that we've got them reduced to 1. So we've got compatibility and character, quality architecture and materials, good neighbor guidelines, trees, and public views. The finding that is currently in the code that is not in the proposed code is health, safety, and welfare. Many board members felt uncomfortable applying the health, safety, and welfare to SFDB projects because public health, safety, and welfare is generally addressed as part of staff's code compliance review of project applications. Additionally, at SFDB last week, the board felt that these first 2 findings could be combined because oftentimes the architecture elements and the materials are part of what makes a project compatible with the neighborhood and consistent with the character of the city. And staff would welcome this commission's feedback on that as well. We made slight adjustments to the hillside design district and sloped lot findings to make them more focused on hill slope aesthetics and public views. And similar adjustments were made to the grading findings. We've heard feedback from the board that they don't feel comfortable reviewing erosion control measures, as that's more of an engineering matter, and again, addressed by staff, than it is a design matter. The board generally supports the proposed findings as long as the erosion control element is taken out. In addition to updating Chapter 22.69, we're proposing several complementary updates to the Title 30 zoning ordinance. Like I previously discussed, currently all minor zoning exceptions require a public hearing and a public notice. We heard from our stakeholders that many of these MZE requests, particularly for tall hedges and fences along interior lot lines, don't warrant a public hearing. So our proposed code changes are to make the community development director or their designee the default review authority with the discretion to review MZEs with the potential neighborhood or privacy impacts to the SFDB. Another opportunity to reduce the number of hearings and the cost to the applicant lies with FAR modifications. An FAR mod is required for projects that exceed 100% of the maximum FAR. And as a reminder, FAR maximums only apply to lots under 15,000 square feet and developed with 2 stories. We heard from board members that FAR is more of a design-related issue than a land use one. Therefore, we'd like your feedback on the idea of converting FAR mods reviewed at Planning Commission to FAR design waivers reviewed at SFDB. If SFDB were to become the review authority for FAR modifications, appeals of those decisions would still be referred to Planning Commission. At last week's SFDB discussion, the board was supportive of this concept. Okay, and Chair Bauke, we can do one of 2 things. We can either open it up again for clarifying questions, or we can go into public comment at this time.
We have a couple commissioners, I think, will want to ask some clarifying questions on the notice in this section. So, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to start with the minor zoning exceptions, and you talked about fences. The process used to be you submit a drawing to the building department with the height and the style of the fence, and it had to accompany a letter from your neighbor saying that they approved of the fence, because there's a lot of disputes about fences on the side properties. So is that still how the process works? Because I'm really uncomfortable with putting this in, and I don't know how you would notice it, because it really applies to a neighbor only, but it does create a lot of, I know when we put in a fence, we had a tremendous amount of difficulty, and it's on our property. So,
Chair Bauke, through you to Commissioner Wiscombe. We have two zoning ordinances. We have Title 28 and we have Title 30. A lot of, when we talk about minor zoning exceptions or MZEs, we're talking about Title 30. So that's our inland zoning code, of course. And Title 28 still has different regulations. So Title 28 is the community development director is making decisions on fences, those overheight fences. However, when we created when City Council adopted Title 30 in October 2017, a lot of the things that used to require modifications, meaning someone would have to go to the staff hearing officer to get a land use approval, a lot of that was a process improvement and moved to the single-family design board or our design review boards to make an aesthetic decision on a matter. So for example, minor zoning exceptions for fences, for trash enclosures, for mechanical screening, all of that shifted from a land use decision to a design aesthetic decision by the design review board. So for minor zoning exceptions, it's now under the review authority are design review boards. Under Title 28, it's still the community development director. You still have to get your neighbor approval. If you don't, it's a modification. Oftentimes, if you're in the front yard or if there's a fence within a certain distance of your front lot line, you're obligated to get conceptual comments at single-family design board, which are then shared with the community development director to make those decisions. That's all under Title 28, and that's
okay, well, I'm not even talking about a fence that's higher than what is. I'm talking about a standard fence.
A standard fence,
Yeah,
correct. Anything, correct.
That maybe your neighbor doesn't like the architectural style it goes with your house, but your neighbor doesn't like the architectural style.
So currently, we have two different processes, one under Title 28 and one under Title 30.
So Title 28 is where I operated, so that was where I had to finally get my neighbor's approval, and they finally did approve it, but it was a big process.
Which I may say, if I could comment on that opinion, is that that's extremely difficult, because think of all the renters we have. You need owner approval, and so that we really run into issues when this comes up, because what if an owner lives out of town? What if what if it's being rented? What if the person is passed on? What if it's up in, a bank owns the property? It gets really tricky when you just want to install a new fence along your side yard and you're not necessarily doing anything profound. And if this were to go to the board, or if staff were to look at it, it would, it would be a no-brainer. Why isn't this okay? So what we heard from our focus groups and from our homeowners, that there was kind of the majority of these minor zoning exceptions get a rubber stamp. So, we put them through so much process and pay for things and time, and the majority of these things are rubber stamped at a hearing. And what we heard was that, how can we let go of some of this, or again, allow this to be administratively reviewed with certain design criteria. So we're still looking at the design, but rather than going the review authority necessarily being the single family design board, it's that community development director, aka staff or designee level approval. And the built-in thing is that we have some, of course, there's always exceptions. So there's going to be the fence that brings all the neighbors out, and you can pretty much tell when you get an application what that might be and what's not going to necessarily fit in. And so part of this proposal is to say at any point in time, the community development director can refer a project to go to the single family design board for that decision. If there's a concern about aesthetics, if there's something that we think warrants a public hearing, and even if it doesn't trigger a mailed notice, at any point in time, we can request, or we can have a mailed notice be sent out if we think it's going to be problematic. And again, those usually jump out at you when you see the plans.
Okay, thank you for the answer to that, Ms. Kakinda. Okay, and I just wanted to move on. I wanted to go on to grading findings. That's a little bit of a concern. So, single-family design board is uncomfortable with erosion control and want that removed. But oftentimes, grading has so much to do with drainage, and I think Mr. Sweeney says it in his letter, that, you know, there are sometimes modifications to topography to accommodate grading. And I don't know if how compelling single-family design board feels about making grading findings. Maybe, Ms. Kloss, you could say something about that, if you struggle with that, or I know you're an architect, but, you know, engineers.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we were a board that was primarily composed of civil engineers, I think we would have no problems
Right.
with this. But the reality is that we're a board made up of architects and of public at large members currently. And so we have a broad capacity to look at topography, changes in topography, general drainage patterns, and to make sort of overarching general statements or review of that. But to actually say that we feel comfortable with an erosion control system and that it is going to keep a site stable, that's where we start getting a little bit nervous about this, because that's basically making a finding that would be better served by a civil engineer or someone who deals with stormwater management on a daily basis like a civil engineer.
So are you saying that you would prefer not to make a grading finding? Because, you know, when they come to Planning Commission, if a project does come here, we get all the civil engineer reports and the hydrology reports and everything else,
Right.
and we're the ones that deal kind of with the stormwater design.
So all of
projects.
that is reviewed during a typical project at the building department level or at the creeks division when they're looking
Right.
at stormwater management. It doesn't really occur in design review. So that's part of our hesitation. So we don't have a problem making the general grading findings, but the specific verbiage surrounding erosion control is where it gives us a little bit of consternation.
Okay, so
If that-
you're all right with avoid visible scarring?
Yeah, I think we can do that because part of our charge right now is to look at retaining walls and their overall or cumulative height, and part of that deals with visible scarring. And we're looking at plantings and how that's mitigated visually.
Okay.
So I don't think we have a problem making those findings from a visual or aesthetic standpoint. We just don't want to get into the civil engineering matters because
Right.
we are not subject matter experts in that area.
Okay, that's a great answer, thank you. And then I have one more question for you, since you're up there, which I didn't think of. Are you good with the FAR design waiver at Single Family Design Board?
I think I addressed that in the letter that I wrote to you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was a late hit.
This morning, and
It was a late hit, but I would encourage all of you to look at that because I attached my comments to the exhibits from staff, and it may help you drill down on some of these verbiage issues and quantification items that we're talking about. I think that we are more and more seeing projects that culminate in 100%, 105% FAR. A lot of that is a product of the fact that now ADUs and that development is included in the overall FAR calc, both in coastal zone and inland. So we're accustomed to seeing those. I think when they are on parcels that have a required FAR, not a guideline FAR, and when we start hitting up against roughly 115%, I think that's a point at which we might consider these still wanting to come to your board.
Okay.
But I think anywhere up until that 115% threshold, we would probably feel comfortable as a board. And this is not based on discussions I've had with any of the other board members. It's just based on 4 years of my observations of where we start to get a little bit nervous as a board with the size of projects.
Okay, but you're including ADUs in the FAR calc?
Those are included in FAR calcs now.
Because
Chair Bauke, through you to Commissioner Wiscombe. So accessory dwelling units are included in accessory dwelling units, accessory structures, any structure that meets the definition of accessory structure, which is a pretty low threshold, or any main building on a single unit lot, is included in the FAR calculation. However, ADUs are so complicated so that the state allows a minimum of an 800 square foot standard ADU. So you might have a residence that is, by adding the accessory dwelling unit in the FAR calculation, it exceeds 100% of your FAR, the required FAR on site. But that won't trigger a modification at this time because it's allowed by the state. But it's still included in the percentage. So it's very confusing. And ADUs are a whole different ballgame. And we just went through the whole process of updating the code for Title 30 and then extending that to Title 28. That FARs for ADUs are added in the total FAR. But again, if you meet the minimum standards for size, that's allowed by the state. If you go over 100% FAR and you don't have an ADU or your ADU exceeds the size threshold, then that would trigger a modification that currently comes to the Planning Commission. So you have seen FAR modifications. We're just kind of, again, trying to think of how can we streamline process where the single family design, because so much of the FAR is an aesthetic issue. It's all about McMansionization and to what extent you develop your lot and trying to manage that. So much of it is an aesthetic issue that, again, this idea was brought forth in order to have the Single Family Design Board be the review authority, again, knowing that if this were to be appealed, which in many instances FAR is appealed, it would still come to the Planning Commission. So it used to be, when it was created, it was established that the Planning Commission would be the review authority to disincentivize going over 100% FAR. It was, you all scare people more than maybe other design review boards. So I think, again, at the time it was a disincentive, and now we're trying to think of it, how can we streamline? But the intention of all of this work is that the sweet spot that has long been established is that 85% FAR. And that's really, we're not proposing to change that conversation.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I think, but Mr. Hamilton Roll, you are, one of the things that you want us to comment on is the FAR design waiver being at Single Family Design Board as opposed to Planning Commission.
That's correct.
Correct,
Yeah.
and the SFDB supported that last week.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next, Commissioner Boss.
Thank you. So thinking about SFDB's charge to really minimize privacy impacts to surrounding properties and the good neighbor guidelines, I know that we don't protect private views, but it comes up a lot. So I don't know how to work that in, or if that is something that should be addressed explicitly more than it already is.
Commissioner Boss, I would say that we do not want to get into the business of private views, and this is very much an educational aspect that comes up when we have a new oftentimes it comes when there's a complete demolition, a new multi-story home being proposed up in the hillside, a large addition. You know, something that's really, you know, why people buy their homes is for the view, or this happens, or now the trees in front of me. But it is staff's responsibility, and it's also, you know, we coach our board members and try to support and advise our members, because again, trying to broadcast that information to the community is really difficult. The only time people engage with the single family design board is if there's a development right next door to them. So almost at every other meeting, we have to coach and describe, please understand that private views are not protected. That can be done through a private easement, a view easement that is completely outside of the city's process. Again, I coach my staff to say that multiple times. I always try to coach the chair to remind members of the public that, and it has to happen on a regular basis because of the general lack of participation on the whole, or you only are interested when there's something immediately affecting you.
And Commissioner Boss, if I could add to that quickly, the city and the SFDB guidelines do encourage neighbors to work together to resolve those matters between neighbors and try to work out a good solution.
Okay, at this point, we should probably open the public hearing portion. Ms. Johnson, do we have any commenters in person or virtually that have raised their hand or handed in a slip? We have one. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I actually have one speaker slip for Leslie Kalas. If you would like to make your way up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
I feel like I've taken more than 3 minutes already, so I'm a little bit embarrassed by that. But there were a couple of points of clarification that I wanted to make. And staff has worked super hard on this, and I want to acknowledge them also, because without this opportunity for compromise, we might be in a very different place today, and I recognize that. And we do hold design review in this town in high regard, and I think that this is a huge step in the right direction in terms of retaining some control over design review in our neighborhoods. In regards to the 250 square foot matter that I think Ms. Wiscombe, you were asking about, I think one of the concerns there is if we have a 1,200 square foot house that currently has a 600 square foot second floor addition, and it was reviewed and it steps back nicely from side yards and it meets all of our guidelines, and then all of a sudden somebody can put 250 square feet on it, what happens to that? So it's not so much that we're opposed to 250 square feet or that we only want it to be 50. It's what is there now and what is the impact of what is being proposed from a cumulative standpoint and a massing standpoint and a bulk standpoint. So that's the bigger concern. So is there some way that we can quantify that? If somebody has a second story addition and they're adding 250 square feet, but it now exceeds 60% of the ground floor level, then maybe that goes to full board. So I think there's a way of doing that, but it needs to be, again, it needs to be quantified and objectified. Decks are a concern in regards to the number that we came up with. If you take a standard 50-foot wide lot, you take the 15-foot setbacks or the setback for decks that we currently have in our guidelines out of that, it leaves you with 20 feet. So if you think that we've got a 20-foot by a 6-foot deep deck, that's kind of what we thought was the sweet spot for 120 square feet. That's where we came up with that. Roof decks are an issue. Everybody wants a roof deck now, and they want it on top of their third floor, and they want it on top of their second floor, and all of a sudden, you know, we're not living in Marrakesh here. We have beautiful outdoor weather. We don't need to be up on the roof decks in the evening for cool air all the time. I think we need to talk about roof decks. I think we need to talk about what constitute quality materials, and we need to define that better, if at all possible. There was an appeal that came before this board in regards to that specific matter, and so I think we need to be very clear on what constitutes quality materials, and I would imagine that that would require a weigh-in from council, because we don't want to put anybody out of business. Definition around the community development director is a great point. Is it staff? Is it a singular person who's reviewing these, who has the qualifications to do that? We have pretty qualified staff right now, and thank you for indulging me for just a couple more seconds here, that have a lot of architectural historical background. They understand style, but staff changes. These two women, one of the women, Pilar, who was here earlier, they were serving our board. They're now in front of you. So staff changes through attrition, through promotions, and when that happens, we may lose these people that have that capacity to review things from an aesthetic or design standpoint. So if we don't have somebody in the department who is named, who has the qualifications to review things, it is a concern. And I think we need to talk about the 50% basement credit, because, and that's a code issue, but it relates to FAR specifically, and it is impacting bulk and mass of residential projects, especially in the Hillside District. And it merits a close look, and I know it's going to get a lot of pushback from the AIA in town if we start looking at that. People are going to think of it as a down zoning, but it is adding to the McMansionization of our hillsides.
Okay, thank
Those
you.
are.
Okay, and I did receive one more speaker slip from Karen Lance. If you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello. My timer's not on. You don't know me. I've been a practicing architect and builder for over 20 years, and I'm new to Santa Barbara. I am a co-author of the survey that went out to all the neighbors and all the people that had filled out, the builders, about their feedback for the single-family design board review. I worked with Ellen Kokinda and Ted for 6 months, kind of putting it together, what all this is based on the feedback. And I'm hoping to see change in a direction to make it easier to renovate and maintain your home. The Riviera is a beautiful place, no doubt about it. I'd like to make an argument that the Riviera is beautiful. Here's a picture with all the houses, but not in Santa Barbara. They're all the houses in Houston, Texas. And when you look at these two pictures, and you can look closely, it's still pretty darn beautiful. My point is that we are too controlling on what the fence looks like and what the window and the shape and the this. All we're trying to do is maintain property. There's a difference in doing new construction versus buying a home, opening up the walls, and when you buy property here, you don't know. Hey, guess what? You got 100 pounds of acorns in your walls. I did. 100 pounds of acorns from the woodpeckers that were going. I had no sheathing. Oh my God, I don't have any sheathing. I didn't know that. The mold. You should have seen the mold. So the project grew and grew and grew. And in the middle of construction, in the middle of demo, the city says, hey, you're going to need to go to design review board. And I'm like, I don't have time. I can't. I'm in the middle of construction. I'm paying rent. I'm paying a mortgage. This is money. The cost of construction here is high enough. The special inspections, there are so many regulations that you go through. The SFDB needs to be streamlined for people that are maintaining their properties. And there's a fear of who's going to get up on the balcony and look down. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about punishment and bad people when we're just here trying to live in this beautiful place and look at the stars. I mean, we shouldn't really be creating this culture of fear, and the city's going to get ruined, because I put Houston all in it, and it's still beautiful. My house in Houston is in here, and it looks the same. So my hope is that what Ellen and Ted have been working so diligently on, I mean, hours, and my time, I was a lot, but I mean, I want to make it better for other people. I have my permit, I'm under construction. I'm not here for me, I'm here for who comes behind me. I'm here for the projects that start and don't finish. People run out of money. And you want the middle. You know, we talk about, what are we talking about? There's more to come. I'll come back. Anyway, I have a lot to say, and I think getting more of this through, I actually think it's too conservative, actually. I think more, if you saw the original report, which I'm sure you did, and I'm a subscriber of the Novak report, design review is too much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I haven't received any further speaker slips, so I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you wish to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but we did receive written correspondence from Fred Sweeney and Leslie Coloss, which were distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bauke.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close the public comment period. So at this point, based on my conversation with city staff, what we should be doing at this point is having sort of your general comments and questions and any direction or clarifications that you would like. This is the time to do that so they can take this information, assess the information like they did from the Single Family Design Board, sort of what we think as a group and what we think individually, and mull it over. I think that's a good way to describe this. And now we have Commissioner DeLucia would like to go first.
I have so much paper here.
Commissioner Bauke or Chair Bauke? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem.
Sure.
I think it would be helpful at this point to give a little direction on the following questions and kind of guide for facilitation purposes the conversation.
Sure.
We have 9 individual questions. Some of them are pretty simple, some of them are a little more complex. I think it would be most helpful for the purposes of the record and for Ms. Johnson if you, the chair, could summarize or try to summarize whether there is or isn't consensus on these questions as we go.
Okay.
Some of the, like I said, some should be easier, some should be a little more difficult, so we'll see. First question has to do with major and minor alterations, specifically for multi-story buildings in the Hillside Design District. So do you support the idea of eliminating SFDB design review triggers for minor alterations and small additions up to 250 square feet? And this would apply, like I said, to 2-story buildings and in the Hillside.
Okay, why don't we go for the folks that are on, Donald, you could go first, then Leslie, and then Devin.
But
and
I
Liz.
actually, I think that triggers back to the definition, right, of the major alterations. I think we need to come up with, we need to quantify that somehow, and you guys need to work on that some more, but I think a percentage basis may work for a major addition, and I think, I like the idea of actually what the original square footage was. Maybe that triggers the percentage of the addition, that would trigger it for become a major. Did I answer your question?
Just for clarification, so there's the difference between alterations and what we have a working definition for is major alterations.
That's what I'm talking about, the major alterations.
That does not include adding square footage. So the square footage piece that we initially proposed as a concept for small additions up to 250 square feet would not trigger SFDB design review. Anything over 250 square feet would trigger SFDB design review.
Right, and that's what I'm talking about, over 250 square feet. As far as what, this part of it actually, the 250, I'm hearing from the Single Family Review Board that they're even concerned about 250. They thought it should be 50, for example. I think it goes back to, I don't know, I kind of like the 250, but it's based on, obviously you're following some the guidelines, design guidelines, when you're talking about the 250, right? And then this, when you're dealing with 250 or less is what you're saying. You only want to trigger it when it's over 250, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So so the concern though of the board was maybe it's not 250, maybe it could be 50.
I think
Right.
to capture what the SFDB
Yeah.
said, it was less about a specific number, but meaning that even a smaller amount, such as 50 square feet, could be, like have a weird appendage or have some different style kind of attached to a home or have a privacy, that it really, it's
But if we
hard
don't have
to
250,
describe.
for example, if we don't come up with a number of 250, in my opinion, then what's going to happen is, where's the streamlining here? Then we're going to go back to, if it's 50 or something, where does streamlining come in? And that you felt like that was a good number to, for the streamlining. But again, you're going to be doing the additions up to 250 based on guidelines that are established anyway. So it's not like you're arbitrarily, their concern was like, had to do with the aesthetics, probably design aesthetics of the 250 probably. But you guys are going to follow some guidelines when you are dealing with 250 or less square feet.
So Commissioner Bauke, or I'm sorry, Commissioner DeLuccio, we've got anything up to 250, it just goes straight to building permit. There's no design review. So that is that's the what's being proposed here, or that's the concept, and that's where SFDB felt like we needed, that was probably too high. And so it's more about, once you establish the trigger, if it's triggered, then they were open to having more administrative or staff level approval of smaller additions, but you've got to trigger design review. The only other way potentially to do that, if you want to establish 250, would be to have specific criteria written in the code, which is a very different concept, and that's really, it has to be very objective. So that's a lot trickier thing to do, because once you get it into design review, that's subjective. That really gets you to being able to kind of clarify, okay, this works, or this is how I suggest making changes. So
It's objective based on guidelines, hopefully, but.
Correct.
I understand, I didn't get, you know what? I didn't get that from your presentation, actually. I didn't get that it was going to be triggered up to a building permit. I thought staff was dealing with the first 250 square feet, quite honestly. So basically, I understand, I appreciate streamlining, but then I begin to share the concern of the board about the aesthetics of it. So I'm not convinced about the 250 square feet. I would have to hear more, obviously, from my other commissioners, but I share the board's possible concern, the way you have it set up.
Okay.
And can we request your feedback on minor alterations being a separate issue from the small addition?
Let's try to keep it on one
Okay.
subject, and I'm going to go
Okay, sorry.
one by one on the one subject, so we could sort of close and before we get down other rabbit holes, if that's okay. So Commissioner Wiscombe, on this particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciated Ms. Colos's example of, you have a 1,200 square foot house, you have a 600 square foot second story on it, and then you want to add, all of a sudden it becomes large. So I think that the up to 250 square feet should not be in there. I think that it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. Perhaps adding, as Commissioner DeLuccio said, and I was actually thinking the same thing, perhaps a percentage is the way to go. If there is a percentage that perhaps works out, that would allow some applicants to go, pass go and go directly to the building department, where other applicants might exceed a percentage of their total development, and they would have to come back. That's maybe one way to look at it. It's complicated, but I think there needs to be some sort of guideline in there for applicants to understand where they might be triggered. But I also think that Ms. Colos's example was perfect. You have a 1,200 square foot ground floor, you have 600 square foot second floor, and then you add 250 square feet, and all of a sudden you've got a big place. So I think you can't have a magic number like that in there. I agree with Single Family Design Board on that. Does that give you enough? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Wardrow.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's helpful to hear, my fellow commissioners and their thought process on this as well, given their extensive background in this space. So when you constructed this as the recommendation up to 250, was there a reason why you guys didn't consider the percentage-based approach that Commissioner Wiscombe and DeLucia are describing?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. So percentage-wise, we just look at the different size. Well, first of all, we had all this data that we were sitting on of what square footage were people asking for and kind of where did they channel. And so, and looking at our administrative guidelines of what can we approve. And so 250 was kind of that sweet spot of, okay, most of these are, have one hearing, or we feel comfortable that this could be a realm that we might be able to operate and make decisions in. Percentage-wise, it gets tricky when you have an 800 square foot home and you do a percentage versus if you have a 4,000 square foot home and you have a percentage. So think about that from an equity standpoint. And most of one of the root causes of the challenge of what we're seeing is that our post-World War II housing in Santa Barbara doesn't really meet the needs of today's world. We know a lot of people work from home. We know that there are a lot of people, renting out multiple bedrooms. If you have a couple and 2 kids and you're living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, most people want to add on. And so getting into percentage world, if you just take 10% of 800 square feet, you're really limited to 80 square feet versus, again, taking 10% of 4,000. So that's where it got tricky when we had conversations with our SFDB subcommittee and our AIA advocacy group to kind of figure out from an equity standpoint of what triggers design review and who it kind of it kind of punishes people with smaller homes in some regards. And unless there's some other way that we could capture that again, ideas we would be open to.
I appreciate that response. I'm going to let Commissioner Wiscombe follow up, but that was very helpful for my purposes.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. I just want to say, I don't think necessarily that on an 800 square foot house, if you use a 10% guideline, that's going to trigger design review. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that it's used as a guideline, so when you get into a bigger example like Ms. Kalas presented, then it might trigger it. But on an 800 square foot house with you could use 10% as the rule and then say, gee, this just can't apply. This doesn't need to, this can go straight to the building department. And that's how it should be done. That was my point. So it's not, I'm trying to take the what you call the equity issue out of it because every example is different. And I live on the Mesa and the houses there's a lot of really small houses on the Mesa. So that deserve and can be developed into bigger homes. So they could not go through design review and go straight to building. And they might be a 50% increase. And I think that's fine. But, I'm trying to give a guideline to applicants that want to develop their property that allows us an opportunity to say, you can pass go and go directly to the building department, or, yours is a significant addition based on your present square footage. That's so. Yeah, a percentage over over what's existing now. So thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow, for letting me
Thank
pop
you,
in there.
Commissioner Wiscombe. So based on kind of the example that Commissioner Wiscombe just described, my understanding is that this still provides the flexibility that staff can then decide, to Commissioner Wiscombe's point, oh, well, this is an 800 square foot house, and they're looking at, a 20%, out of the total to expand. Is from a staff level perspective, is that process, does that make sense more, that you have that discretion and that it would work in the way that Commissioner Wiscombe's describing? Because I very much see both sides. I see what you were saying from the word equity lens, but then if it's possible to do it the way that Commissioner Wiscombe's mentioning of like using common sense, that if it's a 800 square foot project and they're asking for something, that could still pass go and move forward. In practice, would that work, or do you guys have concerns on that?
So, Vice Chair Wardlow, I think the biggest concern for me, and it's hard to kind of get into specific examples, I want to be really upfront and honest about that, and kind of what we need to establish is the threshold for design review. This is code. This has to be code. It's not guidelines, so we need to be very specific. Because just imagine, again, submitting your project, and do I have to go to design review, or can I go straight to building permit? So if I'm not fully understanding it, that's probably on me. But I think we want to make sure that it's kind of anybody can kind of say, building permit, SFDB. And when we say SFDB, the guidelines then specify, can this be approved by staff? Can it be approved or at a consent hearing or full board? So the design review triggers is simply the threshold for, does this trigger SFDB design review? And if that's the case, how do we write that in from a percentage standpoint to be very clear of that threshold being met, that anybody at the counter any planner can take that in, or any homeowner or any architect or any designer can say, okay, yeah, this one's gonna be at a hearing, or this one may or may not get staff approval, but it definitely needs design review.
Okay, this was very helpful. I appreciate your kind of explanation on all of this. I see Commissioner Wiscombe's point on this, but I get what you're saying, and if I'm understanding it correctly, is you want this threshold so that it can be a yes or a no, and if it's a yes, you need to go to a hearing, it could still be that when you review it, you decide, no, maybe you don't need to, right? It's not required, it's just saying this needs further review, and then you guys decide.
This will be under aesthetic review and following design guidelines that are applied to SFDB, and you have to meet this criteria, or if not, we're going to send you to a public hearing.
Okay.
Just one, or I guess one other, go ahead.
Chair Balke and Commissioner Wardlow, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect as I'm hearing you. So the answer is, it is a set limit. We don't get to choose, once it's kicked into design review, we don't get to have the common sense and say, oh, this one doesn't really need it. That's actually the opposite. If it's kicked in, we have no discretion at that point other than which level. It's either administrative or goes to full board.
Okay,
But
got
we
it.
cannot say the ordinance triggers this, and now I, as a staff planner, am going to just not follow the
Okay.
ordinance.
And that's why you're concerned about the percentage point aspect.
Correct.
Got it.
And
Okay.
if just one other comment about what makes it so easy now is that it's any alteration, any
Okay.
size addition. So staff
It's
don't
just
even have
like
to
over-
think about it.
Yeah.
So even coming up with this number, is it arbitrary? Of course it's but it's trying to make sense of what can we do administratively now? What projects have come in, and what are homeowners asking for? Thinking about getting comments and feedback and understanding our staff capacity, like what we're able to kind of feel confident in doing. And I just want to say that we approve administratively accessory dwelling units that are 1,200 square feet on a daily basis. We're kind of forced to be used to this in some way, even if we don't have architecture background. So there's a lot of current context for trying to come up with an appropriate number, and clearly the Single Family Design Board is so aesthetically minded, but we're balancing that with the Novak report potentially eliminating the SFDB, which we thought that's a bad idea, because that doesn't seem to be supported by the rest of our community. But, that we would imagine, but trying to come up with that balance. So that's kind of where we are and how we've established some of these types of of things. But yes, 250 is up for debate.
Okay. I really appreciate this. I will end my questions. Based on this kind of exchange, I do support the way in which staff has moved forward with this. I understand what you're saying about the percentage and the issue with that. I think my fellow commissioners may have more questions, but we can come back to that. But based on your explanation, I think that that makes sense to me. But thank you.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is ask the other three to my right if they have a particular position to express on the question before us. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know how it should be determined, but I agree with the SFDB that 250 square feet is too big. That's a 15 by 15 foot space. And so those are my comments on this one.
Commissioner Barnwell.
I share the concerns of Commissioner Lodge and Ms. Wiscombe and Mr. DeLucchio. The 250 number doesn't seem to cover all of the various unique situations that might pop up, and I think things would slide under the bar. And there is a reason for the single-family design board, and there is a keen interest in the community. And I guess it just falls on us to find out what those nuances are to put into the code. I'm very glad that you gave us the explanation about the code versus the guidelines, but this one somehow doesn't seem to me quite right at the 250 number. Thank you.
Commissioner Boss.
I'm across the board supportive of staff's recommendations.
Okay, and since I haven't weighed in, I've got mixed feelings on this, to be honest with you, and it's sort of like, you guys deal with this all the time, and so does the single-family design board, is sort of where that, like, it's not substantive question comes up, but at the same time, if we were having this conversation, I would say pick a trigger, which there's consensus that the number is something that the board, like the 150, I don't know what the board's was, I think it was 150 or something to that. And have very clear objective guidelines. If you've triggered it, there's a whole lot of outs. If you meet this, you meet that, you meet this, you kick into basically an administrative process. So there's what's really being heard at a public review standpoint is those projects that deserve a public hearing or deserve the neighbors' input and all that. I mean, it's very similar to what's going on with multifamily with the objective design guidelines. To the extent you can quantify this, the better everybody is, because then they know, okay, I clearly meet the design intent that the community wants, and so, yeah, unfortunately I trigger it, but I'm going to get out of this process and through an administrative process as fast as possible. I think that's the balance, because otherwise we're in this issue of equity, and I won't get into my later speech, but the equity works both ways, both for the little guy and the big guy. The big lots, honestly, there are situations that the equity's not for them because of the way the rules work. So at least my experience. So I think it's basically a standard that everybody feels it's de minimis, and then a lot of easy opt-outs if you meet all the design criteria. So that you only catch the real big fish, we'll call it that way. Commissioner DeLucchio.
Well, I don't want to, I'm going to say one more thing, and then we can move on. I think Ellen, you actually articulated a possibility. I just ask if you can explore this some more. It could be, you have 250 square feet. Maybe it can be a percentage or over a certain existing square footage of the existing building. What? That'd be a percentage. I mean, like, we're saying that if a building is real, I understand if it's only 800 square feet to begin with, like, it probably would be able to go right to building permit. But if you had a 2,000 square foot existing building, maybe then it's based on a percentage, of that, which would trigger it coming to, going back to the review board. I just think 250 seems kind of arbitrary to me.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you. To follow up on what Commissioner DeLuccio said, you could actually put in code if you wanted to use 250 square feet and then put in a percentage or a maximum of blah, blah, blah percentage. That would fit perfectly in a code. And then you've got it covered both ways. And then you could just move on from there and either tick the box or not.
Okay, so with that, could we move on to the next question?
We should, yeah.
And Chair Bauke, I'm hearing kind of mixed consensus on this. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on.
I used the word explore, actually. I'm right? It's like,
Oh, okay. So the other so we've gone through the 250 square foot portion of this question. I'd like to hear from the commission whether you support eliminating design review triggers for minor alterations in the Hillside Design District on upper stories.
Could you define minor alteration for us all? Because everybody probably has a perception of what that is, and there's probably a legal definition that you have.
When we're referring to a minor alteration, we're mostly referring to window changes, so change of material from, say, aluminum to wood or the other way around currently requires SFDB review if it's on a second story or if it's in the hillside. A lot of those projects get administratively approved through the building permit, but some of them do rise to the level of needing a public hearing depending on kind of the overall scope of the project. So what we're trying to target here is the stuff that we would normally administratively approve, the projects that don't really rise to the level of a public hearing, that are basically just maintenance. And as Ms. Not Kalas.
Lance.
Thank you. As Ms. Lance was explaining, a lot of homeowners are just looking to update their houses and do maintenance. So we want to try to accommodate that and streamline that type of project while catching larger projects with more of a neighborhood impact. So that's, again, I think we need to do some work on what actually constitutes a minor alteration, but we're talking things like singular replacements of windows, replacements of a few windows, replacing the roof material with a different color and material style, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I'll just start this discussion, the prerogative of the chair. I've always found the replacement of windows from, basically upgrading from, aluminum windows to new windows that are the exact same size, very arbitrary that the city has. So I think that one should just completely go, okay? That's my opinion. When you start getting into changing the physical size of the windows, then you're getting into changing the architecture in lots of cases. And I think the board may have some opinions of how much you can change the width or height of a window before it starts changing the architectural facade. So I don't know where that answer is, but I think that they're the experts on that. But I think the changing out of the windows thing has always been, personally, arbitrary, that the city has that. It's not, most cities don't have that. I mean, it's, you talk to the window guys, they go, oh yeah, Santa Barbara, we got to go do this, so. And then when we get into roofs, we could talk about the role, changing. If it's the same material, I honestly don't think that's an issue, or if it's more in keeping with the architectural style, that goes back to a guidelines question. I don't think we should be going through the single-family review board for that. It's if it's radically different, that's a whole thing. And if it's like counter to the architectural style of the building, and that goes back to a guideline type situation. If you have criteria and objective standards, that if you got a Spanish style building and you're putting on a red tile roof, I don't know why that would need to go to a review process as an example. So, Vice Chair Wardrow.
I am supportive of staff's recommendation on this. Thank you.
Commissioner Barnwell.
I'm just, I'm just astounded at how tricky this stuff is, particularly when you have to, give it a shape and a form that you can hand to somebody else and they will understand the shape and form that you intended. I think I'm being worn down here. And I think I'm being worn down, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but I think I'm being worn down to the point where I'm just going to trust staff. At some point, I have to trust you to, not try and ruin the city of Santa Barbara. On the issue of windows, as every architect knows, when architects talk about it, it's called fenestration, and you wouldn't want to necessarily approve or disapprove some windows based on the already existing architecture of the house, because the architecture of the house may be slider aluminum, and the lady wants to upgrade it. So the architecture of the house would say no, or we got to do some kind of review. So it's complex, and particularly complex when you start talking to the window guy that's going to do the carpentry. Then it becomes a morass. But I'm going to trust the staff here and say yeah, and try and define minor alterations if you can work on that phrase.
Okay, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love the getting worn down. I'm going to go with staff on this, and I'm going back to what your working definition of major alterations is. Include but not limited to changes in building massing, cladding the exterior walls with a new material, or extensive replacement of windows and doors resulting in a new, modified, or disparate architectural style in a structure. So where we actually identify major alterations, then I think we can move on to maybe understand what minor alterations are. And I think staff's, I will support staff's recommendation there. Thank you.
And Chair Bauke, through you to Commissioner Wiscombe, I don't believe I mentioned that our current working definition of a minor alteration is essentially everything that's not a major alteration. So if that kind of helps your review there.
Okay, Commissioner DeLucia.
I'll give you the minor alterations. I'll go with staff on that. And we're not talking about windows, it could be doors or whatever. And I don't think we're just replacements. This is not talking about the structure of the buildings. So, I'm good with that. Thanks.
Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fine with minor alterations, but again, the 250 square feet seems like a bit much for a small addition without any review.
So just to Commissioner Lodge, minor alterations doesn't add a single square foot. It's just changes to the exterior of the residence or site. So no square footage is involved with an alteration, minor alteration.
I understand that. I'm referring to the small additions up to 250 square feet, which could make a substantial difference to the character of the building. Thank you.
Okay, do you have another question for us?
All right, thank you, Chair Bauke. So this one, I think the Commission's already answered the first part of this. Do you support maintaining a design review trigger for major alterations? And if so, how would you recommend major alterations be quantified? I think we've had a fair amount of discussion on this already, but if anybody has anything to add, we encourage that. Otherwise, I think we could probably move on to the next.
Okay, please move on.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay, this one is specifically related to the Mission Area Design District and the Lower Riviera Survey Area, Special Design District. So currently we have quite a location-based focus on our design review triggers, i.e. any alterations or additions in these special design districts require design review. So we want to know if you support rewriting the triggers to shift their location-based focus to a scope-based focus on a project's potential for significant impacts to adjacent properties in the neighborhood. So here we're saying we want to change the triggers. We want to stop saying if you're in this district, you require design review, and we want to start saying if you're a new multi-story building, a large addition, or if you're doing significant grading, that type of work, then you need design review.
Okay, we'll start off Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just, if we just go to staff report, page 6, it lists the pros and cons, and I'm of whether we support this or not. And it says it preserves a key goal of the single-family design board, which I think is a pretty strong statement. So I guess, do I support rewriting the design triggers?
Essentially, if I could
Yeah,
help out with that.
I need some help on what you recommend here, rather
Yeah.
than us giving our
Essentially,
opinion.
what we're asking here is if you support the idea of removing the Mission Area Design District and the Lower Riviera Special Design District as SFDB triggers.
And doesn't your staff report say that you do support that? Or does it?
The city's architectural historian supported that. We spoke with her on several occasions about this, and she agreed with our approach here and informed our approach as well.
Okay, then I agree with that approach also. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Barnwell.
Yes, I agree with staff.
Commissioner Lodge.
I also agree. It doesn't make any sense to me to require, just because it's in that, either of those districts, that it requires single-family design board review.
Commissioner DeLucia.
I agree with that.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Wargo. Sorry. You guys are moving fast.
I agree with staff's recommendation, and really throughout this document and reviewing it last night, I was very in support of the majority of your recommendations, and I actually thought this was one of the better staff reports I've ever seen. I thought it was really clear. I thought it was really helpful of how you guys laid it out. Obviously, this is not my area of expertise, so I do really appreciate you guys answering all these questions, and obviously this is pretty in the weeds, and so thank you.
Okay. Any other? Okay, so do you have another question for us?
Chair Bauke, we have several more.
Okay.
So this is specifically regarding the design review exception for upper story decks. And we are proposing that decks on an upper story that are further than 15 feet from any interior lot line be exempt from design review. And should roof decks be included in the exception? And what do you think about the 200 square foot, 120 square foot, 120 or 100 square foot threshold there?
Okay, Commissioner Wiscombe wants to start first.
Okay, I'm just going to go, I don't always necessarily have to turn on my light first, but I just.
You're just quick.
So I do support design review exception for decks that are further away than 15 feet from any interior lot line. Roof decks I don't know a lot about, but Ms. Colossus had said you're getting a lot of roof decks. I'm tending to think they should not be included in this exception. I'd like to hear your comments on that part.
They tend to create a lot of privacy concerns
That's
for neighbors.
what I figured.
Because what's happening is someone's lording over somebody's property.
Right, okay. So they should not be included in this exception. And also, I'm going to go with the single-family design board and go with the 120 square feet as opposed to the 200 square feet. I think that's a more comfortable level for that. Okay?
Okay,
Thank you.
Commissioner DeLucia.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the 120 for the balconies and elevated decks, and also I think a trigger. The balconies on the roof should go to the single-family review board. It shouldn't be included in this.
Okay, Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The roof decks become living space, and they most definitely have to get reviews from top to bottom, not just for the privacy component, but just for the actual living space and the structural, everything about it. Otherwise, I agree with the rest of your suggestions.
Commissioner Boss.
I agree roof decks should not be included in this exception.
Commissioner Wardlaw.
I agree with my Commissioner Boss's comments that roof deck should not be included.
Okay, with that, I agree with the removing the roof decks from the exception. I probably would say, I think the recommendation of the Single Family Review Board is to size is a little low. I actually support staff's recommendation on the deck.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other commission comments?
Not on that one, so do you have another one for us?
We do. Chair Bauke, we do have 4 more questions. These should be a little bit more straightforward than the first few. We tried to front load a little bit. So if you want to keep going, we can. Otherwise, I might recommend a short recess.
No, what do you guys think?
Can you run some questions together?
Can you do more than one question at a time?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a good question. Can you do
Yeah.
number 5 and 6 together or something?
So this, yeah, they're on separate slides, but we can kind of
Okay.
go through them all and
I think, if I may interject, I think this is just the one question we have on mailed noticing, and then we
Okay.
have one on findings, and then, so I think they'll go a little bit faster than the multiple part questions that we've just had.
Okay,
Yeah.
so to this question, Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're still going to post the building permit request on the property, right? So if anybody walks by it, they'll see that there's a no?
Commissioner Barnwell, so every building permit that you pull, you have to have a placard up on site. The building permit application and process is separate from the planning application approval. This mailed noticing is only when a project or when you have a planning application and it triggers the mailed notice.
Right.
So
Well, I support the building department's notification that there's going to be work done, and that's, I think, sufficient for these smaller projects. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner DeLucia.
My answer is yes to the question. I support staff's recommendation.
Okay, Commissioner Wiscombe.
I'm a yes.
Okay, Commissioner Boss, got an opinion on this one?
Yes.
Okay, and I concur with my fellow commissioners as to this particular item. And she does too. Okay, so we have that from Commissioner Lodge. So as to the next question.
how do the proposed amendments to the required findings resonate with the purpose and goals of SFDB? And is there anything missing from the findings we're proposing?
Okay, Commissioner Boss.
I think today there was a recommendation to combine quality architecture and materials with compatibility and character, so I'd support that combination.
Commissioner DeLucia.
Yeah, I support that, and I also support the grading to eliminate the erosion, thing about the erosion control.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yeah, I support combining A and B that Commissioner Boss talked about, and also what Commissioner DeLucia said about eliminating the erosion control. Thank you.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support the staff's position on this. I don't think that the SFDB is being gutted by virtue of what we're doing right here. I do have one, I don't think anybody in here understands how big a square yard is. When we talk about 250 square yards, that's a big number, and 500 is even bigger. I don't know if you've actually thought about those, we're talking about numbers, but those two numbers. I mean, a square yard is 3 feet high, 3 feet long, and 3 feet wide. And you put together 10 of those things, and it's a monster. So that number of 250 to 500, I think, is an important one for you to wrestle to the ground. But I only say that as a passing comment. But we don't have, people sitting here have no idea how much a yard is, and it's a lot. Thank you.
Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Commissioner Wiscombe and DeLucia on the 2 points they were making.
Commissioner Barnwell. Okay, so, Commissioner Voss, you already spoke, right? Okay, so I agree with the purpose that we're doing here and the goals. What I find very interesting is the survey. And the survey clearly says a lot of people don't like this process for lots of different reasons. And since I think this is probably the last question, get on my soapbox a little bit here. As somebody who went through this process early on, and it's probably morphed and improved, I found it personally arbitrary and capricious. It just purely was based on opinions. I had a particular case of I had one of the biggest lots in a neighborhood, and because my lot was significantly bigger, they said my house was going to be too big. Even though it was only 70% FAR and all my neighbors were in the 80s, they just basically rejected it out of hand because you're going to have a big house, even though within 5 or 6 lots, there was a house that was 6,000 square feet, and another one a little farther away was 10,000 square feet. So there are neighborhoods that have a lot of requisite variety, and I really have a concern about how sometimes that variety is trying to become something that's like this like Irvine-esque, everything has to be about the same size type communities. And I think variety, especially the areas that have large variety of lots, it should be based on straight an FAR. When you get into the design, that's another question, but just to say your house is too big, even though you're at 70%, it's just arbitrary. You know, that was my personal experience. And I think you've gotten better. And the whole idea of, the nearest 20 houses doesn't necessarily reflect a neighborhood. It just means those are the houses that are, because you can go 2 more houses away and have other variety. So that's a criteria and something I see that's sort of developed institutionally that's somewhat problematic. And it varies by parts of the city. But up in the Riviera and Eucalyptus Hills, an example where I live, there's lots of different lot sizes. And so my neighbor's lot was like half the size of mine. So just on that. And so the other thought process is, to the extent we can make things more objective in the standards and clearer as to what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what triggers design review, what doesn't trigger design review, that's beneficial to everybody. And it's that subjective process that I think it's real clear there's a lot of subjectivity based on those comments that are in the survey that I think is where the community, at least those users, had issues with how subjective some of it is. Some of it seems like it's not necessarily design, it's the desires of particular members of the board. And, the board's been morphing over years and there's been different personalities on it, but I'm not sure if that's just the current board's comments or, or comments about the current board or comments about the board over 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I'm not sure exactly what the survey, that audience was, or just users in general. But so that's sort of my overall thought process. This community design is important, and that's why it was created, because when I moved here, it didn't exist. And we did a major remodel before it existed. And when it came back to do something else, it existed. And then you sort of get in this weird rules that changed, but it was real clear the community asked for it. And it's more a case of trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. And to the extent you, from your experience, can figure out where that is and set up those things like the standard for the decks, perfect example. You now have some criteria to sort of sort things, is an example. And the more you can do that on other things, the better. I think the relationship between the community and those users and the board, and we will meet the objectives that it was formed in the first place for. So, sorry for my soapbox comments, but so. Any other commissioners have any other comments on? Okay.
We appreciate your feedback. Thanks for hanging in there. These are the last two questions. Should be fairly straightforward. So one, do you support amending Title 30 to make the director the default MZE review authority with the ability to review those minor zoning exceptions to design review if needed?
Commissioner DeLuccio is first.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. However, do we have a definition in anywhere in the design guidelines in defining what the community development director is? Just as, is there anything in there that says, community development director or their designee or something?
There is. It's defined in the municipal code and in the zoning codes.
So that helps me. So then when we're referencing it throughout the other places and we're saying community development director, it should be clear.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boss.
I think my comment was just to add the or designee.
Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I support number 8 with the addition of
Commissioner Wiscombe.
or designate.
Or designate. Commissioner Wiscombe.
I'm sorry, I missed what Commissioner Lodge said. You support number 8 with what?
The addition of the community development director or designee.
Okay, yeah, I support that also. Do you want us to comment on 9 too, while we're here? Okay.
Well, if you'd like.
Commissioner DeLuccio said go for it, so I'm just going to.
I thought we were almost done with that one. So.
I'm going to agree with 9.
I am too. I spoke out of turn.
All right. Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with both of these things and the comment about what is the community development director. And as I was sitting here, I just noticed that Ms. Arcienaga's desk is 1 cubic yard. That's how big a cubic yard is right there. So when we talk about 250 of those things, that's what we're talking about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Wardrow.
I am yes and support both of these, 8 and 9.
Commissioner Lodge.
I support number 9 as well.
Okay, and Commissioner DeLuccio, do you have another comment?
Do I have another comment? I do support, and actually, I don't know why it was coming before the planning commission when the FAR actually has to do with the scale and bulk and whatever of the building that's before you, and so the upside is it would come here for appeal anyway. So I think it's kind of cool we don't have that conflict that is, that where it's going, then it would come on appeal to us.
Okay, and my comments are on question number 8. I support that, but I would like to make a recommendation that to the extent the designee exists, that it is somebody that has as much architectural background, and I would like to recommend the city actually look at the idea of having a town architect like you have in the Public Works Department, in your department, to the extent feasible in your budgetary process, because that's a skill set that honestly a lot of planners do not have, and to the extent you have a person with those skill sets in the organization would be very helpful. Notwithstanding that you don't have that, but you've probably got it from trial and error is really where I come out. And as to number 9, yes, and then back to my comment about FAR, I just think we need to be consistent in how it's used. And there are cases that's not applied consistently. So moving on, more questions?
All right, thank you, commissioners. That concludes our discussion. Next steps for this project, we're going to go back to the drawing board with your comments and update our draft of the code amendments and design guidelines. We'll return in the fall of 2024 for another review, hopefully to get your recommendations next time. We'll also probably go back to SFDB sometime before we come back to the commission here. After Planning Commission, we'll go to Ordinance Committee to review the draft ordinance, and then sometime late 2024, we anticipate going to City Council for introduction and adoption. With that, just like to really thank you for sticking with us. That was a lot of dense material. We really appreciate your comments. And if there are any last questions or comments, we can address them here.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton Rohr. Anybody else have any comments, questions? We've got Commissioner Wiscombe and Vice Chair Wargo.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you. This has been a tremendous work effort, and the surveys were great. The public input, the whole process was great, and you clearly listened to people and developed. And I also like to thank Ms. Kolos, because you've endured this whole meeting, which is a feat in itself, and I truly appreciated your input. I think it's very important, and thank you for all you do, too.
Vice Chair Wargo.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. Yes, I just want to say thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot in this process and in the staff report, and I thought it was really, really well done. It's very clear that you guys have taken a very diligent approach to addressing the findings from the Novak group, but keeping it in the context of Santa Barbara, where clearly we do want to keep our design review boards. It is very important to us, but what is the best way possible of how to reduce the burden kind of on our city, on our staff, and then on the applicants as well. I really commend you guys for working through all of these very specific pieces. To me, this seems like a very positive step forward, and I really appreciate all the work that you guys have done. Thank you.
Commissioner Boss.
I'll pile on my thanks for all of this. This was a really painless staff report, so I just appreciate it. It was really well written, and just I was able to absorb it and clearly, ask and answer questions. So thank you for that. And I think in the long run, we know it'll help staff, it'll help applicants, it'll help the design review board. But I think it also, by streamlining things and making them less dense, it will open up the design review boards for different types of applicants who may be qualified, but before they were concerned about the amount of work needed that they would need to do. So I think it opens it up to other community members who are qualified but worried about the workload. So thank you for that too.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
I want to thank Mr. Hamilton for all the work you put into this, especially and bearing with us this afternoon. And Ms. Koss, thank you so much for being here. I really respect your work on the commission, and I hear you're leaving after 3 years, and you're going to be missed and hard to replace.
Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add my thanks and appreciation for all the hard work that went into all of this, including all of the extensive preparation and reaching out to the community. I'd like also to add that Ms. Kolas sat through this at the Single Family Design Review Board as well as here. So thank you for being here.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Me too. Everybody wants to, if we can, shorten this whole process. And a couple meetings ago, we found out how understaffed it appears that the planning department is. And so anything we can do to shorten the amount of work, and particularly meetings, when I get a little glimpse, as you have given us today, of the work you do, I don't know how you do it. Like you just said, you're going to come back to us in November or fall of 2024. I mean, that's eons from now. So that means you're going to be continuing to work on this and presenting it to other people, modifying it. That's a big workload, and I thank you for what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Definitely thank you for your efforts. And this is quite an undertaking, because I remember when I was a community development director, having to make these okay, well, about here's where we're going to get a number that works internally, and this is tough. This is real tough stuff. So thank you for trying to define where that line is, because and everybody's going to have an opinion, and there's probably no right or wrong answer to this. But the effort of trying to simplify and streamline is something I think the community's looking for, and I think you're doing a good job. So thank you with that. And any other comments by the commission? Okay. You're dismissed.
Much appreciated. Thank you all for
Thanks.
bearing with us. And again, to Ms. Collas, who's been part of this whole effort and has seen a lot of the dysfunction and the challenges and has been through all of this. I just want to thank her. And also just want to thank the AIA, who's been such a great help and partner through this. So it's really much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you much. So let's get through this administrative agenda so we can all go home. All right. Do we have any committee and liaison reports? We should have one from Commissioner Boss.
Yes, so the staff hearing officer liaison report, I didn't get to watch yesterday's, but it was, I think, an enforcement case for, so since we have the staff hearing officer here, anything we should know?
Pardon me, but I'm kind of on maternity leave, so I wasn't staffing it. We have Principal Planner Dan Gullett, who is going to be staffing the show while I am out. So
I will watch it and report back
I
next
haven't
time.
watched it. I don't know the update.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So moving on, Commissioner Lodge, you have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. The Architectural Board of Review on March 18th gave final project design approval to 425 Garden Street, which was before us. It's a project that backs up to Smart and Final. Another approved project with no parking. And they also gave final design approval to the Santa Barbara neighborhood clinics on 621 West Mitchell-Torena. So both of those projects are on their way toward building permits.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Any other reports? Okay, I have one, which is the State Street Advisory Committee met on Monday, and at that time, we received a presentation by a group of architects led by the chair of the Historic Landmarks Commission, showing basically visual sketches of ideas of how State Street could be implemented. And it was very well received. It's a sort of a start of sort of now we're getting into the process of details and design and getting past sort of those fundamental decision issues like bikes and cars and stuff like that. So hopefully in the next meeting, there'll be another set coming forward, and maybe this, if staff has any more comments on that, but it was I found it to be a positive step in that process, and I look forward to the next meeting. And they're going to be working on getting the report closer and closer, and I did pitch that they should come to us early on before we just have a hard copy to react to, that we have sort of concept level. And that was also pitched, the chair of the HLC suggested that they see so the concept early on. And so with that, I think we're done. So I'd like to close the discussion today at, what time do we have here? 4:06 p.m. And that concludes the March 21st, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, April 4th at 1 o'clock. Thank you for being here.